The first sensation was cold. A biting chill seeped into his bones as Liang slowly regained consciousness. His head throbbed with a sharp, pulsing pain that stabbed through the fog, clouding his mind. Fleeting images surged forth, memories that weren't his. A young boy named Leon. A simple, joyful life in the countryside. His father's steady hands teaching him how to string a hunting bow. His mother's warm fingers brushing through his hair. Golden sunsets on dusty paths. Laughter echoing down quiet forest trails. Then blood. The memory shifted. Crimson spilled across the dirt. Mercenaries. Gleaming blades. His mother's screams tore through the air, mingled with pleas for mercy that went unanswered. The boy's fear turned to fury. His tiny fists clenched in helpless rage before a blow sent him crashing to the ground. The last thing he heard was their laughter, mocking, cruel. And then, darkness. Liang's eyes snapped open. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. His vision swam, but the haze of foreign memories began to recede. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to push past the bitterness, the hatred that didn't belong to him. The past was not his, yet it clung to him like a second skin. He tried to move but found his wrists bound by heavy, crude iron shackles. Shifting slowly, he dragged himself up against a wall of rough wooden bars, his muscles aching, skin raw. Around him lay dozens of others, crammed into cages like livestock. Men, women, children, none older than their early 20s. Most bore bruises, bloodstains, or worse. Some sobbed quietly. Others stared with hollow eyes. Foreign voices barked orders outside in a harsh, unfamiliar tongue. The jeers of mercenaries who reveled in cruelty. Liang realized the truth. He had been taken. He was now a slave. Panic threatened to rise, but he forced it down. Think. He took slow, measured breaths, searching the boys, his memories for answers. Who am I? Leon? No, I'm Liang. The soul fragments began to fade, revealing his true self. 26 years old. A mundane life back on Earth. No vices. A modest job. Average in every way. Yet now he was here, trapped in a broken body, in a world that felt carved from a medieval nightmare. Armored soldiers. Iron weapons. Crossbows. The blood and fire of war. This was no dream, no movie set. Somehow, he had transmigrated. He didn't know how. No accident came to mind. No blinding light. Just nothing. A blackout, followed by this foreign cage. A voice pulled him from his thoughts. You're still breathing, then? I thought you were gone yesterday. Liang turned toward the sound. A pale-skinned boy, perhaps 15 or 16, sat nearby. Though his clothes were ragged like the rest, his complexion was fair, perhaps once a noble or the son of a merchant, Liang guessed. Suppressing a dry cough, he rasped, Who are you? The boy shrugged. That doesn't matter. You should be thanking her instead. He tilted his chin toward another figure. Following his gaze, Liang's eyes landed on a young woman in her 20s. Her features were weary, clothes torn and stained, but beneath the dirt, there was a gentleness in her expression, beauty dulled but not erased by suffering. Thank you, Liang murmured, voice hoarse with sincerity. The woman gave him a tired smile and nodded, though her eyes remained guarded. Beside her sat a muscular young man, perhaps her brother, judging by their resemblance. His gaze was hard, protective. His dark skin and bruises hinted at both physical labor and recent beatings. Liang didn't meet his eyes for long. The hostility wasn't personal. It was the defensive instinct of someone with little left to protect. Around the cage, the other prisoners were no better off. Every face told a story of pain. Even the woman who had cared for him bore signs of abuse, marks he didn't want to think about too deeply. He looked toward the cage's bars. Thick, reinforced. Escape was impossible without outside help. And even if they did break free, what could a group of starving, unarmed captives do against professional killers? He sighed, frustration burning in his chest. For now, there was nothing to do but wait. Time crawled. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cages. Hunger gnawed at him. Compared to this, even the drudgery of his corporate life felt like paradise. Then shouts. Urian language. You Syrian pigs. Get up and eat. The guttural cry of a mercenary startled everyone. Several soldiers approached, tossing sacks into the cages. They pulled out lumps of something resembling food, grayish hardtack, and flung them into the dust like feeding animals. Water skins followed. Liang stared at the food. Too little. Far too little. Not enough for everyone. The muscular youth moved first, grabbing 2 pieces and a water bag before returning to his sister. Others followed, quietly and quickly, like ghosts chasing crumbs. Liang didn't move fast enough. The food was gone. He slumped back in his corner, stomach aching but still manageable. At least the water was passed around. When it reached him, he tilted it above his lips, careful not to let his mouth touch the spout. It was filthy, but necessary. Across the cage, the woman who had helped him watched with a troubled expression. She held the food her brother had taken, yet she hadn't eaten. She hesitated, then stood as if to share it. But her brother pulled her back. You barely ate yesterday, he snapped, voice low but firm. His concern was sharp, edged with frustration. His eyes flicked to Liang, his message clear. Liang raised his hand slightly. Thank you, but I'm not hungry. The woman stopped, reluctantly, sitting down. Her brother's tension didn't ease. Suddenly, another voice. I'll split mine with you. I'm not that hungry. It was the pale-skinned boy again. He sat beside Liang and offered half his hardtack. Liang hesitated, then accepted. Thank you. The boy nodded and bit into his own piece. Earlier, you asked who I was. Azarian Flaral, from the Flaral family. And you? Liang paused, choosing his words carefully. The body's original name matched closely to his own. Leon. No surname. Azarian raised an eyebrow. He had pegged Liang as a noble, judging from his quiet demeanor. But names didn't matter here. Noble or commoner, they were all slaves now. They exchanged no more words. There wasn't much else to say. In this cage, under a foreign sky, Liang chewed slowly, each bite gritty and hard to swallow. But he swallowed it all the same. The fire of survival had been lit, and it would burn. The next morning arrived not with warmth, but with screams. Leon jolted awake to chaos, shouts, sobs, and the sound of scuffling feet. Blinking against the crust of fatigue, he sat up and looked toward the source of the commotion. A cluster of Canadar mercenaries had gathered outside the cages. They stood guard around a stern-looking man draped in a military coat, marked with the white sigil of a bird. Likely an officer. His expression was cold, his impatience clear as he watched the scene unfold within the cages. Inside, 2 armored soldiers were dragging a woman toward the gate. She kicked and screamed, but her resistance was futile. Her young brother, Lokak, clung to her with a desperation that shook the soul. He cried, screamed, cursed. His legs kicked wildly at the mercenaries, but they didn't flinch. Let her go. She's all I have. Let her go. His voice was raw, more sob than shout now, the grief choking his words. The woman, his sister, was crying too, but for a different reason. She begged him, pleaded with him not to fight. Stop, please. Don't make it worse, she whispered through tears, trying to protect him even as she was taken. Leon's fists clenched as he watched. The memories of his own family's slaughter, his parents' lifeless eyes and the blood-drenched blades, flashed through his mind. Anger surged, hot and raw, but logic held him in place. He was unarmed, shackled, weak. A firm hand pressed down on his shoulder. Leon turned. It was Azarian. Don't get involved, the boy said quietly. We can't help them. Not yet. Inside the cage, one of the mercenaries threw the woman to the ground. Another grabbed Lokak by the hair and yanked him back with cruel force. A boot slammed into the boy's chest, sending him to the dirt. Filthy pigs! The mercenary spat in the urea tongue, his fury drawing his sword. The woman's eyes went wide. Panic overtook her. She crawled to the soldier's feet and clutched their legs, crying uncontrollably. Please, please, I'll go with you, just don't hurt him. Please, he's only a child. For a moment, the sword hovered midair. Another mercenary gave a subtle signal toward the slave traders watching nearby. The soldier, cursing under his breath, sheathed his blade, and instead hauled the woman up by the arms. "Sister!" Lokak howled, coughing blood as he staggered to his feet. His rage outmatched his injuries. He charged. Leon's breath caught as the boy dove toward one of the mercenaries, ducking under a swing and crashing into him. Somehow, even with shackles, Lokak managed to reach for the man's sword. But the mercenary was faster. With a swift movement, he struck with his knee, hard and brutal, into the boy's ribs. Lokak flew backward, landing in a heap. The soldier stepped forward and kicked him again, this time without restraint. The boy didn't get up. His sister's cries faded as she was dragged from a cage. "If you weren't worth coin, I'd gut you right here," the mercenary muttered, spitting near Lokak's unconscious form before walking off. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. The prisoners looked away, dull-eyed. No one helped. No one could. Leon crouched beside the boy, checking his pulse and wounds. Bruised, bloodied, but alive. He gently rolled him onto his side to ease his breathing. That was all he could do. By the time Lokak stirred, the sun was high. He opened his bloodshot eyes, then immediately winced. Every breath hurt. His body trembled. Pain forced him into a fetal curl, and the fire in his eyes dulled to grief. He didn't cry loudly anymore, just a low, broken whimper. Leon said nothing. What words could soothe a heart freshly shattered? Eventually, even the whimpers faded. As dusk approached, the mercenaries returned to throw in food, this time slightly more than before. Leon moved quickly, unlike yesterday, and managed to grab 2 portions of the coarse, gray bread. He glanced at Lokak, still curled up in the shadows, unmoving. With a sigh, Leon placed the extra food beside him, then sat down to eat his own. The boy didn't stir. Leon looked at him and muttered, "If you starve here, you'll never see her again." No reaction. Leon frowned. "Fine. If you're not eating it, I will." He reached out. In a flash, the boy's hand shot out, snatching the food. His eyes burned, not with hope, but with survival. He devoured the bread in silence. Leon raised an eyebrow, mildly impressed. "Guess you're still in there after all." The boy didn't reply, but slowly pulled himself into a sitting position. He stared at Leon for a long moment. Then, in a rough whisper, "You said you don't want to stay here. Do you have a way to escape?" Leon noticed Azarian's glance shift toward them. The question hadn't gone unnoticed. "I want to escape," Leon said truthfully. "But no, not yet. No plan, just a desire." Disappointment clouded Lokak's face again, but Leon leaned closer. "As long as you're alive, there's a chance. You lose that, you lose everything." Lokak fell quiet. His gaze dropped to the dirt. "As long as I'm alive," he echoed, voice low. He shuffled closer to Leon and slumped against the bars. Leon looked at him, thoughtful. "My name's Leon. What's yours?" "Lokak," came the solemn reply. "Don't do something that's stupid again, Lokak," Leon said gently. "Why not?" "Because if you die here, no one will be left to rescue your sister. Not even a chance." Lokak said nothing, but he gave a slow, grim nod. Leon exhaled again. He'd lost count of how many times he had done so today. His eyes wandered down to his shackled wrists. The iron cuffs bit into his skin like permanent reminders of helplessness. His words had sounded noble, but they were just that, words. He still had no plan, no means, no path. Even breaking free from these bindings felt impossible. Still, he leaned his head back and closed his eyes, conserving what little strength he had. If nothing else, he had to live long enough to see that chance appear, because surviving was the first step toward freedom.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
The following days continued to pass without hope or incident. In the midst, captives were still being dragged out one after another by mercenaries and sold to various buyers. The number of people in Leon's cage gradually decreasing, and he knew that sooner or later it would be his turn. Just as Leon was listlessly scratching the 6 tally on the ground, he noticed 2 mercenaries approaching his cage, babbling incomprehensibly, one looking ecstatic, the other as if he'd lost his parents. Urea language. This one, In this one, just these three, I won't take any more. Hurry up and open the cage. I still have to get back before the city gates close at night, said the Canadar mercenary with a joyful face, pointing at three youths huddled together in the cage. Urea language. The price of these 3 slaves is enough to clear our debts. Remember not to fucking bother me at camp again. I'm done gambling with you for life, complained the mercenary who opened the cage, pushing the door open with annoyance. Although Leon couldn't understand the dialogue between the 2 foreign mercenaries, he could tell from their gestures and the rough commands he'd heard many times that they were ordering him and a few others to come out. As he stood up, Leon glanced at Lokak and Azarian, who had also been pointed out. Seeing Lokak's hateful and menacing gaze, Leon's heart skipped a beat, fearing that the guy would impulsively act out as soon as they got out, and quickly slowed his pace to whisper a reminder beside Lokak. This isn't the time. Rash actions will get us all killed. Lokak knitted his brows and didn't reply, but he finally nodded. Urea language. God damn it. What the hell are you babbling about? Shut your mouth and hurry up. The Canadar mercenary who opened the door obviously couldn't understand the Syrian language, and he impatiently yanked Leon out. Leon meekly did not resist, allowing the mercenary to attach another iron chain to his shackles. He, Azarian, and Lokak were successively chained to their own shackles, forming a line. Urea language. Keep up. The mercenary, delighted with the easy acquisition of 3 slaves, took the keys to the shackles from another, and then shoved Leon, who was in front, causing him to stumble, and cursed to signal the group to follow the camp road. Right now, Leon had neither the strength nor the mood to resist such humiliation. He could only press on to quicken his pace and avoid a few kicks. They passed between the barracks and through a series of guarded camp gates. The path they took caused Leon's eyes to widen involuntarily, and soon, against all expectations, they were led out of the tightly guarded mercenary camp. The chain-link procession proceeded along a muddy trail, far from being called a road, surrounded by open fields with woods in the distance. Leon trod with difficulty, his bare feet sinking into the ground, paying no heed to the pain in his feet as surprise and joy surged in his heart. He didn't know where the mercenary beside him intended to take them, but he realized this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Away from the camp guarded by mercenaries, the only things restraining their freedom now were that single soldier and the shackles on everyone's hands. Leon's heart pounded frantically, and he glanced sideways at Lokak behind him, who also had a flicker of desire to act in his eyes. Taking a deep breath to calm his rationale, he turned his head and continued on, quickly sizing up the Canadar mercenary who was escorting the group with peripheral glances. The mercenary wore a helmet with a nose guard and chain armor fitted with iron plates. An armed sword hung at one side of his waist, a dagger on the other, and a round shield on his back. Looking at the mercenary's weapons and armor, Leon gradually calmed down. With the mercenary fully armed, the 3 of them, unarmed, would find it difficult to pose a threat, even if their hands were free. Moreover, whether it was himself, Lokak, or Azarian, they had all been weakened by long starvation and imprisonment. Under such conditions, 3 unarmed youths rashly confronting a mercenary would be nothing short of suicide. What about simply running into the wilderness? That was also unfeasible. Leon glanced down at the iron chain linking them together, an item designed to prevent slaves from escaping. The chain binding the 3 captives was not long. Trying to run would easily cause them to fall in a heap. Besides, how could 3 starving youths outrun a mercenary? Even if they didn't trip, they'd easily be caught by the mercenary, who would unsheath his sword and thrust it through their hearts. Was he to give up? Yet having finally gotten the opportunity to leave the cage, far from the camp filled with soldiers, to possibly break into the woods after a brief run and regain freedom in this deserted field, if they missed this God-given chance, what if the destination they were being taken to was even more tightly guarded? In the midst of his troubled contemplation, taking advantage of the moment, they rounded a small hill. Leon stole another covert glance at Lokak behind him. Their eyes met, and he could feel the other's rage growing harder to contain, as if only waiting for a signal to act together. That youth, enduring his hatred, would without hesitation turn and pounce at the mercenary even while his hands were shackled. Leon's gaze moved past Lokak to land on Azarian at the end of the line. The fair-skinned youth was also discreetly observing the mercenary escorting them. He immediately noticed Leon's covert glance and, meeting Leon's eyes, gave a subtle, firm blink. No longer peering around to avoid alerting the mercenaries, Leon buried his head back down. He had already garnered the will of the two behind him, ready to act on a moment's notice. Lokak, needless to say, would fight alongside them, and even young Azarian would join them with all his might. The three sought their freedom, and now was the time when the likelihood of success seemed at its highest. Despite the low odds of defeating the mercenaries, they had to take the gamble with their lives at stake. The fiercest fight of his past life had been nothing more than playful swordplay at the sword hall. Now, he found himself playing the role of Spartacus, risking his life. Had he known this, he would have definitely taken hand-to-hand combat more seriously. Complaining to himself about the involuntary life-and-death pressure, Leon's heart was pounding as if it were a drum. Suddenly, a faint breeze whisked by in front of him. An imperceptible movement came from his wrist. The soft click was masked by the clanging and jingling of the chains as they moved. If not for the vibration on his own wrist, Leon would have almost missed the sound. He looked at his manacled wrists in confusion, feeling the previously tight and secure binds now significantly loosened. Doubt swirled up in him, unbelievable as it seemed. Leon tentatively arched his wrist. As expected, there was no resistance from the manacle's lock. There was indeed a small gap between the two U-shaped iron rings, just enough to wriggle free. Had the aged lock core broken? Was he really that lucky? Right when he was prepared to fight to the death, Leon pressed down his arms anxiously, tilting the iron rings upward to hide the irregularity on his wrists, unable to contain his surprise and elation. A gentle and pleasant female voice then arose from the depths of Leon's heart. Only one chance? The sudden voice startled him. Who was speaking? The voice continued, talking to itself. Remember this spell, Isa's arrow. Aim it at your enemy. A pair of blurry hands appeared as though a shadow had materialized before Leon's astonished gaze. The hands, glowing softly, drew a series of simple, graceful gestures before fading away dreamily. Shoving his astonishment aside, Leon quickly glanced back at the mercenaries. The mercenaries continued to march on, their expressions unchanged and oblivious to the transient phantom scene that had just appeared. Leon sighed with relief. Who are you? He attempted to question the voice deep within his heart once more. No response. After calling out several times, the questions sank into the silence of his mind like pebbles into a still lake, eliciting no echo. Leon had to give up trying to communicate for the time being. He did not believe it was a hallucination or a vision, for the manacles on his hands were undeniably unlocked by a force beyond his understanding. So what did Isa's arrow mean? Was he to perform those gestures towards his enemy? Magic? The simple memories left by the original hunter's son had little knowledge, but Leon, bombarded by various fantasy works in modern times, relied on his imagination to speculate amidst his confusion. Perhaps another consciousness akin to a soul was inhabiting his body just like him. She was helping him escape by unlocking his manacles with a power similar to a spell. Leon's gaze grew resolute. There was no time for pointless doubts. Regardless of the existence of magic, he had to seize this opportunity. At the very least, having his hands freed significantly increased his chances of survival. And regarding the gesture displayed by that mysterious consciousness, from her literal words, perhaps it was a kind of spell akin to shooting an arrow. What was its power? Could it pierce the chain armor of the mercenaries? What was its range? He had no way of knowing. Blood boiled along with his mounting tension as Leon took deep breaths for the final adjustment of his heart rate. The mercenary continued to walk by their side, maintaining a position at the end of the line to monitor the three men's progress. Leon knew there was no chance to launch a surprise attack from behind. Whichever of them acted first, the mercenary would have ample time to draw his sword and meet them in combat. Then, as the one furthest from the mercenary, it was Leon's role to draw the enemy's attention. A breeze whispered through the wild grass beside the path. Leon's gaze swept over all the even possibilities right in front of him, searching for a spot to set foot upon. Now was the moment. His arms bent, he violently pushed the manacles off his wrists and pulled, freeing his hands completely. As he took a step forward, Leon swiftly turned and shouted back at Lokak in a stern voice, "Strike now! Together!" Amidst his roar, Leon took the lead, charging toward the mercenary along a curved path to his left front, immediately capturing the startled gaze of the mercenary. This distance did not allow Leon to reach the mercenary before the latter could draw his sword. Leon's charge was meant to entice the enemy to face him directly, creating an opportunity for the other two to strike from sides. Lokak, although surprised to see that his companion had broken free, was well prepared. The robust young man turned and charged at the stunned mercenary with the quickest speed he had ever mustered. Azrian was just a beat slower in his reaction. Since the chain of his manacles was still connected to Lokak, he had to follow Lokak's movements and rush toward the mercenary. Urea language, "Damn it, you're asking for death." Although startled by the sudden rebellion of the three slave boys, the mercenary didn't panic and certainly didn't turn foolishly to one side as he quickly stepped back, expertly whipping out the armed sword from his waist. The moment the blade was in his hand, the mercenary halted, turned aggressive, and swung his sword viciously at Lokak. Killing a slave might mean a loss, but the mercenary knew that only a swift and decisive show of force could keep these overbold youths in check. Even Lokak, in his rage, could feel the bone-chilling closeness of death as he saw the sword blade falling. With no weapon to deflect, no armor to protect his body, and no distance or space to dodge, Lokak futilely raised his arms. He thought he saw death itself, a flash of his parents' agonized faces, his sister's tear-filled eyes as she was dragged away, and the blade cutting through his arm, chopping off his head along with a spray of blood. The breeze seemed to hang, slow in midair, and Leon felt as if time itself had slowed. His left hand raised, with the middle and ring fingers curved intricately, just as that mysterious illusion had shown, while two fingers of his right hand came together, pointing like a sword toward the mercenary. Leon didn't even have time to pray that the strange gestures would work before his body was overwhelmed by a sensation of his blood rushing toward the tips of his left hand's index and little fingers. His right hand appeared to be yanked backward by some inexplicable force. And then he saw a miraculous burst of light. A light arrow bloomed, scorching the air, the dazzling flash shooting out along the trajectory his right fingertip had pointed. It flew instantly. Light pierced the mercenary's right arm. A gut-wrenching thud. Flesh ripped, bones snapped, and the sound of tearing chain armor was painfully clear, freezing Canadar mercenary's snarling face in place. Pure power spiraled, shredding flesh and chain armor, flinging the disconnected right arm into the air. Arg! Arg! At the moment his brain processed the pain, the mercenary's eyes bulged, his face a mask of disbelief and utter agony as he screamed. In his torment, he clutched his remaining stump of an arm, retreating and weeping uncontrollably. Listening to the mercenary's agonized howls, Leon hadn't even started to feel the thrill of success when dizziness overwhelmed him, and he collapsed, blacking out. With the mortally injured mercenary retreating, Lokak, narrowly escaping death, didn't feel the sword's blow. Charging for his life, the robust youth crossed the final gap and knocked the one-armed mercenary flat on the ground. Azrian stumbled and fell in a heap with them. As they collapsed, Azrian caught sight of the armed sword falling alongside the severed arm. He was the first to react, stretching out his shackled hands to reach for it. "Arg, you damn brats! I'll kill you! I'll kill all of you!" cried the toppled mercenary, struggling violently, his instinct to survive momentarily overcoming the searing pain of his torn arm. He clutched at Lokak's neck with a grip strong as a vice, making the young man gasp for air. Lokak couldn't immediately fend off the dying man's counterattack, but managed to grab the dagger blade on the mercenary's other side. Without hesitation, the youth plunged the long dagger into the mercenary's flank. But even with all his strength, the dagger blade couldn't pierce through the thick chain armor and armor lining. Despite the pain, it wasn't enough to make the frenzied and terrified man let go. Until, with a wet thrust, blood splattered, accompanied by the sickening sound of flesh being sliced, a sharp sword tip emerged from below, stabbing through the mercenary's jaw and into his head, delivering the fatal blow that ended the struggle. The dying mercenary's eyes popped, his mouth spewing blood, twitching a few times, and then he was still. Seeing this, Lokak freed himself from the dead mercenary's grip, panting, and turned to his companion. Azarian was leaning beside him, holding the armed sword he had managed to reach, the blade turned upside down, allowing him to stab into the gap not covered by chain armor or helmet. Phew, good job, Lokak said, getting up from the corpse and helping Azarian to his feet while catching his breath and expressing his gratitude. Azarian struggled to stand, glancing at the dead mercenary with a mix of relief and satisfaction of vengeance for his family. Now that the crisis was over, they suddenly realized and looked toward Leon, who lay motionless on the ground. The boy who had just conjured a light arrow like a deity was now collapsed, lifeless. Hey, Leon, what's wrong? Lokak rushed to check on his companion, tripping over the chains in his haste. Wait, find the key and unlock these cuffs. Azarian was much calmer. He crouched down and searched the dead mercenary's body, quickly finding the simple cylinder iron key. They helped each other unlock their cuffs. Freed, Lokak hurried over to Leon, whose life hung in the balance. Azarian didn't rush to join him. Instead, he crouched down and began stripping the mercenary's body of chain armor, clothes, and anything useful, knowing their flight had just begun. Where's this? Leon gazed at the towering dome above. He was in a lavishly decorated palace. Exquisite carvings and tapestries adorned the columns and walls. However, when he looked further away, his gaze was denied by an unfading vague white fog. An unknown impulse made him look again to the front, where a staircase between the halls led to higher ground. At the end of the staircase stood a majestic throne. Leon slowly lifted his feet. Step by step, he strolled up the staircase. He walked for a long time, but the throne remained elusive, always out of reach. This is not the place you should come to yet. Go back. The voice was very familiar. Darkness descended swiftly. When Leon groggily woke up, he saw the uneven cave walls, and shadows flickered uncertainly on the stone walls, cast by the fire flickering in the wind. It seemed to be a natural cave between mountain crevices. Outside the cave, he could hear the sound of wind and rain intermingling, leaving him momentarily disoriented. Another traverse? Leon was stunned for a moment, but as the drowsiness and confusion faded away, he remembered everything that had happened before. He recalled how the flash of light from his hand severely injured the mercenary, and then, unexpectedly, he lost all strength and consciousness. So now, Leon turned his neck, which felt slightly stiff, to look beside him. In his sight appeared the slightly comforting figure of his companion. Next to them was a simple campfire built up with stones. Azarian was lying not far from him, asleep with a shield for a pillow, holding a sheathed long dagger. And at the entrance of the cave, shirtless with chain armor draped over him, was Lokak. He wore an iron helmet and held the one-handed sword that had belonged to the now-deceased mercenary, gazing out at the stormy, thunderous, and rain-swept night, obviously on watch duty. The rain was heavy outside. Leon had no idea of the time, but seeing the dark, lightless outside, he guessed it must be night. He propped himself up to sit, and although his spirit still felt tired, at least his body was unharmed. Lokak, hearing the noise of Leon sitting up, looked over. Seeing the companion he had been most worried about finally awake, he breathed a sigh of relief. You're awake. How long was I out? And where are we? Leon sat cross-legged, removing the thick armor lining that someone had covered him with and rubbed his temples to ease the dizziness. His hands were free from the manacles, and the freedom to move them felt extremely comfortable. You've been asleep for almost a whole day. As for where we are, you probably don't mean this little cave. Azarian said we should now be in Mamer County, Canadar. Mamer County? Well, that's as good as not asking, since the original owner of Leon's body had never left his hometown for birth. He didn't know anything about the geography of the enemy Canadar kingdom, even if inside the Syrian kingdom itself, apart from knowing the way from his settlement to the Holy Land City. Oh, not that he had no concept of it at all. At least, he knew that the invading Canadar kingdom was to the west of the Syrian kingdom. He seemed to recall merchants who traveled far and wide saying that further north, there was an even more powerful Orland kingdom that was on good terms with the Syrian kingdom, unlike the hostile Canadar. Do we have any water or food? Leon asked. Yes, there's still some food left, Lokak said as he stood up, took a water flask and some dry bread from a torn cloth wrap, and handed them over. Clearly, these items originally belonged to the Canadar mercenary they had killed. What happened after I passed out? Leon asked while eating and looking toward Lokak. We killed that guy, then stripped him bare and dragged him into the woods to bury. Lokak briefly described what happened after Leon fainted. You handled it clean enough. Just don't leave the body on the road. That's good. The muddy path was trampled with footprints and horse tracks. It must be the route the mercenaries frequently used. If the body was discovered too early, someone might have tracked us down. Leon nodded. Cough, cough, it was Azarian's idea. I'm not that quick-witted. Lokak scratched his head awkwardly and said, to be honest, he had only wanted to carry Leon away as quickly as possible, without realizing that Azarian wasn't in a hurry to leave, and even went as far as to superficially turn over the blood-soaked mud to cover it up. There was a bit of a dispute between him, eager to leave quickly, and Azarian because, without suitable tools, digging a hole big enough to bury a body was very laborious. Thank you for not abandoning me as a burden. Leon expressed his gratitude with relief. Are you kidding? We owe our survival to you. How could we possibly abandon you and flee for our lives? Lokak shook his head and thought of the other's incredible performance that day, which he still found unfathomable. The young man's eyes sparkled with curiosity as he tentatively asked Leon, speaking of which, that day, what was that? Whoosh, in an instant, I only saw a beam of light break that Canadar bastard's hand. He stuttered for a moment, not knowing how to describe the light arrow he saw. Holding up his right arm with a piece of chain armor sleeve missing, he exclaimed in admiration, That's amazing. It even pierced through armor. Is that witchcraft? Leon shrugged his shoulders with a wry smile. I don't know how to explain it to you. I heard a voice. Just take it as a miracle of divine protection, since I'm not sure it can happen again. He remembered the mysterious voice saying there was only one chance. And although Leon was unclear about the workings of the spell, he didn't believe that a simple gesture could materialize the light arrow out of thin air. Recalling the sudden excruciating pain as his blood boiled when releasing the light arrow, Leon instead considered that at most he had served as a launch platform, and the one who truly cast the spell was not himself. However, recalling the powerful impact of the glowing arrow, he was deeply impressed. It completely shattered the mercenary's arm, chain armor, and the thick armor lining in one shot. Something even some ordinary caliber bullets in his past life could not achieve so easily and cleanly. But the cost was also unexpectedly high. Leon had not anticipated passing out after releasing the light arrow. He looked at the torrential rain flickering with thunder outside the cave. If these two young men had been heartless enough to run away and left him unconscious in the forest of fate, then even if he wasn't captured back by the mercenaries, he might have fallen prey to wild beasts during his unconsciousness, or simply died of hypothermia in the pouring rain. A miracle? A voice? Lokak was startled and didn't continue to pry. Such power beyond comprehension was hard to understand. Since his companion attributed it to a miracle, he would also have to believe it was the manifestation of Saint Soul and the Holy Prophet. Ilaral above, it seems the great Holy Sun has not abandoned us. If we can return to Syrian someday, Leon, you might become a priest of the church. Seeing that power as the protection of faith The young man's emotions were uplifted, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hearing the young man's statement, Leon was happy to keep it simple without explaining further. As a modern-day soul, he naturally didn't have any particular sentiment towards the Holy Son and the Holy Prophet of the Syrian kingdom. But it was indeed a fact that he was saved by an incomprehensible power. He was grateful to that mysterious voice he could not yet respond to. And what if it was really a divine being showing mercy? After all, even the utterly absurd event of being transported to another world had happened to him. So who was to say that this strange other world didn't have real deities? What should we do next? Any ideas? Leon swallowed a piece of dry bread, slightly easier to eat than the stuff given in his cage, and asked Lokak, who sat across from him. I want to rescue my sister, Lokak stated with unwavering certainty. You're planning to go find her now? Leon felt helpless about the young man's recklessness. Of course. I can't let her fall into the hands of those Canadar bastards, those devils who should go to hell. They're not human. If my sister gets... Lokak's eyes suddenly reddened, and he couldn't stop recalling the cruel slaughter of his family by merciless mercenaries on the day the city fell, his voice growing increasingly clenched with anger. Do you know where she is? Leon countered, without knowing her location and having no refuge. How do you plan to find her? Lokak's brow furrowed increasingly, not knowing how to respond. All right, brother, let me ask you something else. Do you speak the language of the Canadar people? Leon asked pragmatically. Lokak opened his mouth, but fell completely silent, his expression bitter and helpless. I understand how you feel, Leon sighed sympathetically. It was not merely lip service, since he shared the profound memories of the original host's parents' tragic deaths. However, if the drive from hatred and anger isn't unleashed in the right direction, then it's entirely pointless. We're still in enemy territory. Neither you nor I speak the language of the Canadar people and can't pass as locals. Once we make contact with outsiders, we could be caught by soldiers and thrown back into prison or even tortured, Leon explained, glancing at Lokak's tense expression, and added, besides, even if we knew where your sister was sold to, you alone couldn't save her. The man who bought your sister seemed to be more than a mere civilian. Even if I wanted to help you, I'd be powerless to do so. He's right. Another voice suddenly interjected. Leon and Lokak looked towards Azarian by the fire, the fair-skinned young man having been woken up by their conversation. Azarian moved his slightly stiff shoulders from sleeping and continued to Lokak. The person who bought your sister is a noble of the Canadar kingdom. Judging by the emblem on the cloak, he's at least a knight. Trying to confront him to take her back now would be nothing more than a suicide mission. Suppressing his fury, Lokak clenched his fists tightly and bowed his head, hating his own weakness and helplessness. Indeed, going after a noble from the enemy nation alone was a foolish act, only courting death. In the cramped cave, 3 youths sat on the ground, illuminated by the light of a bonfire, discussing which direction to take for their future escape. Maymur County is here. Azarian used a stone to crudely sketch out a few outlines on the ground, then pointed to the northeastern edge within the bottom left contour. Based on the route that the prison carriage took initially, we are quite close to the border. Even if we take a longer route, it might take about 6 or 7 days to get back within Syrian territory, but we must be careful to avoid soldiers, bandits along the way, and wild beasts. Leon suddenly interjected. I think escaping eastwards is not appropriate right now. Azarian and Lokak both looked at him, puzzled. What? Asked Lokak, not understanding. Leon's soul, after all, came from Earth, and he did not have as strong a sense of homeland as the other two when faced with the memory of the Syrian kingdom. Thus, he recognized the situation they overlooked. Leon pointed to the drawn border line on the ground and explained, the war has already started. Since the Canadar army has captured Relentless City, who knows how many other counties in the Western Kingdom might have been invaded simultaneously. Isn't it even more dangerous to go back to a place that's likely already occupied by them? Azarian was stunned by the statement. After all, he was still a youth who hadn't fully grown up, and his quick mind still struggled to grasp a broader view of the situation. Leon continued to the distressed pair in front of him. I'm not sure where the Canadar army has already invaded, but what if they've brought the war deep into Syrian territory? How many dangers might we three have to cross before reaching a safer area further east? Unless you have distant relatives in an even farther eastern place to whom you can flee, it might be worth taking the risk. Otherwise, our arduous journey back to our war-torn homeland won't be much better than our current situation. Hearing Leon's words, Lokak's gaze darkened. Other than my sister, all my family has been killed by the Canadar people. Now, even if I return to Syrian, I wouldn't know where to go. Azarian gave a bitter smile upon hearing this. I still have some relatives, but they probably wish that my father and I had died in Rolanor too. Leon looked surprisingly at the complex, self-deprecating expression on Azarian's face. Azarian, gathering his emotions, then asked, "So where do you think we should go now?" Leon thought for a moment, pointing to the upper part of the boundary outline Azarian had drawn. I heard from traveling merchants about the Orland Kingdom to the north. They speak the same language as us, don't they? Azarian nodded. As a noble offspring with some education, he had a fair grasp of geography. Not just the language. Orland and Syrian were both kingdoms established by our fellow people historically, although most there do not believe in the Holy Son and Holy Prophet. With a positive response, Leon then proposed his own suggestion. Instead of risking it by fleeing east back to Syrian, how about we head north to the Orland Kingdom for refuge? After all, the Canadar people would surely not start a war with two kingdoms at once. Besides, most of the soldiers from this county should have been gathered to the east to maintain the war effort. Now, heading north, we may encounter less danger. After finishing, he sought the opinions of his two companions. What do you think? Azarian thought for a while before finally nodding. Although we can't say for sure that heading to Orland will be safe, it's definitely less risky than running to the east. I'll follow your lead, Lokak said dully. Naturally, he didn't have a better idea. Once they had unified their opinions, they had a temporary goal and direction. Leon's tense, nerves somewhat relaxed, but only relatively speaking. Although they had escaped the prison's captivity, their homeland had been occupied by the Canadar army, and without any family or shelter left, the threats of hunger, disease, bandits, and wild beasts they needed to face to survive in these perilous, turbulent times were hardly less significant than the blades of soldiers. How much food do we still have? Leon asked. Just 2 pieces of dry bread, Lokak replied, looking at the shriveled cloth wrap. The dead mercenary clearly hadn't been prepared for a long journey, and the rations carried in the package were few. Leon looked towards the storm outside the cave. Once the rain stops, I'll try to see if I can catch something to eat outside. You know how to hunt? Lokak asked, a bit surprised. Yeah, my father was a hunter, and I learned hunting skills from him as a child. It should be no problem to catch some small animals. It's just unfortunate that we don't have any bows and arrows, Leon responded, recalling the tracking and hunting skills from the original owner's memories, regretfully sighing. That's up to you then. I only know how to fight. Lokak scratched his head and seemed to think of something, passing the armed sword towards him. Do you need this? If it's helpful, then use the sword. And my chain armor too. Actually killing that guy was your achievement, so you should be the one to split stuff taken from him. Saying so, he looked towards Azarian, right? Azarian did not disagree with Lokak's statement, but also shook the dagger he held. I have no objections, but for hunting, Leon might need this more. Indeed, Leon nodded. Rather than the sword, he needed the dagger to work branches into hunting tools. As for allocating supplies, there was no need to agonize. The 3 of them were sharing the same boat of hardships and already trusted each other quite deeply. Leon believed that weapons and armor must be given to those who could make the best use of them. Leon had indeed experienced various kinds of cold weaponry in his past life, but he was uncertain whether the adults playing pretend in the sword hall, dressed in armor, could be truly effective against the ruthless soldiers who licked their blades. Having experienced the uneven, ankle-twisting mud of the wilderness, he had come to rationally understand that in real-world wilderness combat, his experience adapted to flat floors and modern roads now might not even keep his balance steady. Furthermore, Even if he knew some rudimentary swordsmanship techniques from his previous life, his current body, which had never learned sword fighting, also lacked the proficiency to use them. Thinking this, Leon glanced at the physiques of the two men in front of him and silently assessed. Being a hunter's son himself, he had never lacked for meat, and Azarian, as a nobleman's offspring, also had ample nutrition. Both of their physiques were outstanding among peers, but Lokak's physique was noticeably more robust than either of them, though Leon wondered if it was natural or due to training. "Which of you knows how to use a sword?" Leon pondered and asked. "I have studied swordsmanship, but I don't have much experience in sword combat," Azarian replied with an understanding of Leon's considerations. Lokak patted his chest confidently. "I can fight with a sword. My father was a soldier in the city guard army. I practically grew up in the barracks. During the Canadar people's siege, I was on the city walls assisting the guards until—" His voice dimmed as he recalled past battles. "Until my father made me rush home to protect my sister and mother." "Cheer up. It wasn't your fault." Leon handed the armed sword back to Lokak and also gave him a thick armor lining. "Since you have the most experience with sword fighting among us, both the armor and sword are yours to use. These items collectively make more sense." After saying this, he turned to Azarian. "Continue using the shield and long dagger. In case of danger, you can use the shield to protect yourself and assist Lokak in combat. Of course, I wouldn't run away while you guys are fighting the enemy," Leon said jokingly, spreading his hands. Azarian shook his head. "You've given us all the gear, so even if you took the chance to slip away, it would be understandable." Lokak straightforwardly chimed in from the side. "Right, you've already saved our lives once. If danger really comes, you can run first. I have absolutely no complaints." Leon just smiled, didn't say much, and continued to inventory items with the two of them. Besides helmets, chain armor, one-handed swords, long daggers, round shields, clothing, and water bottles, the mercenary's tattered bag also held a dozen silver coins, a bit of unexpected fortune. "If we encounter a decent settlement, we can use this money to buy some food and tools," Azarian suggested. "But we don't speak the local language. How can we trade without raising suspicions?" Leon frowned. "No worries. I actually speak the Urea language commonly spoken by the Canadar people." Azarian pointed to himself. "If there's an opportunity, I can try going on my own." And so they discussed back and forth for a long time until the rain outside gradually lessened, and the three of them took turns keeping watch before finally falling asleep. The next day, after the weather had completely cleared, they left the cave and entered the forest to search for food urgently. Luckily, they found a small river in a mountain ravine. Leon taught his companions how to make simple fishing spears with branches, and they spent the morning fishing, then returned to the cave to start a fire and solve their immediate food problem. Having gnawed on unpalatable, hard rations in the cage for so long, always going hungry, now even the completely unseasoned roasted fish tasted delicious in everyone's mouths. Hunger indeed is the best spice. In the afternoon, Leon used raw fish meat and fish innards as bait and set up a few small traps made of dirt pits, branches, rags, and vines in the forest. Though they were only resting here one last night, having some catches before hitting the road could make their escape journey lighter. At nightfall, sitting by the cave entrance against the rock wall, Leon, who was keeping watch, wasn't idle either. He carved a fairly flat wooden stick from a small trunk found during the day, then began sharpening the tip on a rock to create a spear. No matter how crude, it was good to have something in hand to deal with beasts. After all, even a simple wooden spear, when used correctly, could cause deadly harm to unarmored targets, and even if they faced armored mercenaries, he could still cause some distraction. As he sharpened, Leon couldn't help but reminisce about the light arrow he had conjured. What was it called? ISA's arrow. That thing was more powerful than an ordinary rifle bullet. If he could use it again, they wouldn't have to worry about threats from ordinary beasts or individual soldiers, even considering the fainting drawback. Anyway, Lokak would definitely not abandon him unconscious, so it was somewhat acceptable. Leon suddenly laughed, dispelling his own dreamy, foolish thoughts. The mysterious voice hadn't responded to his calls since that day, and it was pointless to dream of possessing a power that wasn't his. To have experienced that miracle once was already lucky enough. "Ah, who are you?" Touching the sharpened spear tip, he murmured, the voice having been rather pleasant, seemingly that of a young girl. However, the speculation he had made in haste back then might not be solid after all. Although the voice had indeed come from within, that didn't prove another soul consciousness inhabited his body. Maybe it was just some kind-hearted Miss Mage passing by, who decided to lend a hand from afar. Leon was amused by trudging through the wilderness proved to be more challenging than expected, and the group's pace was considerably slower than they had hoped. There was only one pair of boots scavenged from the mercenary, and regardless of who wore them, the other two were forced to walk barefoot. However, despite being extremely careful, Azarian soon stepped on a sharp object hidden in the grass and injured his foot. Thus, the single pair of boots had to be given to him. Thanks to Leon's hunting expertise, they were able to catch rabbits, dig out birds, and spear fish along the way, eating whatever they could find. At times, they even feasted on the wolves that foolishly attacked them. But when luck was not on their side, they often had to satisfy their hunger with wild fruits and plant tubers. As they had no map and could only vaguely discern directions, they often found themselves more confused as they walked, leading to lost bearings. It was many days before they finally came across a rural path, which made their journey somewhat easier. This was the first sign of habitation they had come across since escaping the vicinity of the mercenary camp. As soon as they knew Azarian could speak Urea language, Leon had wanted to find a village as soon as possible to exchange their silver coins for survival resources. The discomfort of long treks barefoot in the wilderness was unbearable, and the chill of the night was even worse, with their lack of adequate clothing making it almost intolerable. They quickened their pace, and upon reaching the end of their line of sight, the sight of a small village scattered with thatched cottages gave them all a lift of spirits. However, instead of heading straight for the village, the three of them dove into a nearby forest. Following the plan they had discussed earlier, Azarian, who spoke Urea language, donned chain armor and strapped on a sword and shield. He was to go alone into the village with coins to scout, and if all went well, Leon and Lokak, who had no knowledge of the language, wouldn't need to risk further complications by going there themselves. The fair-looking Azarian was well suited to masquerade as a knight attendant, given that he was a noble's son from Holy Land City. His speech and demeanor were more than enough to bluff the rural villagers. Leon and Lokak climbed a nearby hillock for a better vantage point to observe. As Azarian's figure disappeared behind the village houses, Leon noticed something odd. Despite it being broad daylight, he couldn't spot a single villager's movement from his high vantage point, which made him suspicious. While Leon's gaze was still searching for any local villagers, Azarian, who had entered the village not much earlier, ran back out and waved to Leon and Lokak from the entrance, signaling them to come over. The two men, hiding on the hill, exchanged looks. Despite their confusion, they emerged from the woods and hurried to their companion's side. "What's going on?" Leon asked as he arrived at the village entrance. "There are no living people here. The place is a mess, and there are a few corpses. The villagers must have fled a long time ago," Azarian replied as he handed his sword back to Lokak. "Were this village attacked by bandits?" Leon finally noticed the chaotic crisscross of horse hooves at the entrance and the low wooden fences knocked askew. "I'm not sure, but we shouldn't stay here too long," Azarian fretted. "The corpses look like they've been here a while. If there are any surviving villagers who fled, they might seek help from the local lord to send troops to exterminate the bandits. Let's find anything useful quickly and get out of here before anyone shows up." Leon internally lamented the rampant banditry of these medieval, chaotic times. Without further ado, they entered the village promptly to gather supplies. The wooden doors of the cottages were all wide open, some of them even violently smashed down, which facilitated the trio's scavenging, as they kept their distance and moved from hut to hut, each going their own way. Although every cottage had already been looted by bandits, it was clear that the thieves wouldn't take everything, not even the trash. Leon had turned over several houses in a row and soon found the shoes he had been longing for beside a bed in one of them. Even if they were just shoddily constructed shoes with woven straw soles and worn leather bindings, they were still better than continuing to torture the soles of his feet. With these ill-fitting fur shoes on, Leon's scavenging efficiency greatly accelerated along with his lighter footsteps. He quickly moved his hands and feet through the chaotically ruined interiors, rummaging through boxes and cabinets. Although he didn't find anything that could be called valuable, he soon came across some dusty, coarse linen jackets and tattered trousers. The frayed edges and the coarse, hard texture were extremely uncomfortable to wear. That's why even the robbers didn't bother with such rubbish. But having clothes to wear was better than none at all, and they would at least keep the wind off. Using scavenged rags, he made pockets and collected the scattered coarse bread and some grains that had spilled on the ground into a ceramic bowl. In his heart, Leon couldn't help but complain that these bandits really did scrape the ground clean, leaving behind nothing useful except for leftover grains and some broken jars and pots. Carrying the only harvest in his rag pocket, he entered another wooden house. The first thing he smelled upon entering was an unbearable stench, and looking toward the back of the house as he followed the smell, he was shocked by the scene in front of him. The first thing that caught his eye was a female corpse showing signs of decay, naked and with a tragic death expression. Just by looking at the posture of the body, one could imagine the inhumane torture and atrocities she suffered before death, and what made Leon's anger boil was that the deceased looked very young. To put it bluntly, they're a bunch of goddamn beasts. With a silent tribute, Leon turned his eyes away and then suddenly realized there wasn't just one body. Not far away, there lay a beheaded male corpse, also stripped of his clothes, his posture that of being bound with his hands behind his back in a kneeling position. The body was covered in sword-inflicted wounds from before his death. Looking at the fallen head next to it, the man appeared older, maybe the father of the female corpse. It was unimaginable to think of his despair and pain as he was forced to watch his daughter suffer brutalities before his death. Leon could no longer bear to look. He stepped back a few paces and closed the door to the room. The human tragedy that unfolded in this house kept reviving the miserable memories of the body's original owner. Nothing was more infuriating and painful than having personally experienced something similar. Lokak finished searching another house and walked over. Seeing Leon only glance in the door before stepping back out of the wooden hut, he couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong? Is there anything inside?" Leon sighed and shook his head. "There's no need to search this house. There surely wouldn't be anything valuable left in there." Lokak, looking puzzled, stepped forward and opened the door to glance inside. He then retreated with an even uglier expression than Leon's and took a deep breath to calm his violently fluctuating emotions. Even he, who harbored a deep-seated hatred for the Canadar people, couldn't help but be psychologically impacted after witnessing the same tragedy befalling the ordinary civilians of the enemy nation. "Let's go." Leon patted his shoulder. It took quite some time, but after searching house by house, the three of them managed to essentially turn the small village upside down. In the end, they did reap some rewards. They collected enough food to last the three of them for a while. Additionally, Leon and Azarian, who had no clothes, found some worn straw sandals and hemp garments to cover their bodies, finally shedding their wild man appearance. Moreover, they unearthed 2 rusted pitchforks from a corner of a farmhouse, allowing Leon to finally discard the rough wooden spear that had been sharpened time and again. With their backpacks secured, the three didn't dally and quickened their pace to hit the road again before it became dark. That evening, they satiated themselves with a meal of barley porridge mixed with beans served with coarse bread. Yet, even with this long-missed proper meal, there was no sense of joy in their hearts. Anyone with an unextinguished conscience would find it hard to put those village atrocities behind them in a short time, let alone the harrowing scenes that continuously reminded the three of their own tragic experiences. A night without words passed, and with the break of dawn, they continued on their journey. With shoes on their feet and a stockpile of food, their speed increased significantly. Around noon, Leon suddenly felt a faint trembling of the ground. He was momentarily dazed, then quickly remembered the techniques his father had taught him and promptly got down to press his ear against the ground. It was not an illusion. The vibrations caused by the mass of hooves indicated that a large group of riders was approaching. "Hide quickly. There's a cavalry coming from behind." Leon urgently summoned his companions. Lokak and Azarian, without a doubt, followed Leon's lead and ran toward a nearby forest, sprinting as far as they could from the road. They dared not look back as they burrowed into the wilds to conceal themselves. They lay low behind a mound, holding their breath in silence. It was only when the rumbling hooves had gradually faded into the distance that the three let go of their tightened nerves and poked their heads out. Who were those people? Were they a bandit's cavalry? Lokak first thought of the pillaged village they had encountered the day before. Leon was noncommittal. Who knows? They could be the local lord's troops. Should we continue along the same road? Azarian asked, frowning with concern about encountering that group again. Leon fell into thought, feeling that he had miscalculated. He had assumed heading north would be safer, but they ended up encountering an armed force anyway. The rhythmic, orderly sound of the hooves told them without a doubt that this was a troop of well-trained cavalry. He couldn't be sure if this cavalry was the vanguard of some army, with possibly a larger force following on their tail. If his conjectures were true, then under no circumstances could they turn back now. After sharing his suspicions with his companions, they had a brief discussion. They decided to keep moving forward in the same direction through the woods. As strangers in a foreign land, they didn't have much of a choice anyway. Everyone be careful and stay alert to any movement on the road. If something isn't right, we'll all run deeper into the forest together. The group quickened their pace through the woods by the roadside in silence. Before long, another rumbling of hooves orderly passed along the road, prompting them to hide once more among the forest undergrowth, with Leon feeling even more pressure. Before nightfall, they veered off the main road into the deeper part of the dense forest and found a rocky hollow back facing the direction of the road to safely light a fire and set up camp. During the night, Leon lay restlessly on the ground, unable to sleep. Heading north had been his idea, and now the road ahead was fraught with risks, which made him feel somewhat regretful. Would there be troops setting up camp at the end of the road? If they ran headlong into the Canadar army, could they escape? Or perhaps they could try to blend in as locals by using a few phrases of Urea language that Azarian taught. While mulling over these thoughts, he furrowed his brows, suddenly recalling the village from the day before, and felt a contradiction. If such a large-scale local army was maneuvering frequently nearby, how was it possible that bandits had the audacity to raid a local village? Weren't those bandits afraid of stumbling upon the Lord's army and having their heads taken as military exploits? Unless Leon remembered the fall of Rolanter City, the scenes of the Canadar army and savage mercenaries burning, killing, and plundering in the Holy Land city. He came to a cruel realization in his heart. An ancient adage that had once seemed far removed from him sprang to mind. Thieves pass like a comb, soldiers like a lice comb. Perhaps the plunderers of that village were the Canadar army itself. As they moved further away from the road that extended to the north along the edge of the forest, Leon and his two companions didn't dare to leave the wooded area and expose themselves in the open fields as before, for fear of the dangers ahead. Inevitably, their path shifted westward, gradually distancing themselves from the well-trodden roads. Traversing the dense forest and its challenging, rough terrain, the land gradually rose until there was no path left to follow, and they discovered they had unknowingly arrived at the edge of a canyon cliff, where their views suddenly opened up. Below the cliff lay a vast and vibrant river valley plain. However, the trio had little mood to admire the majestic scenery before them. Their gaze was swiftly drawn to the chaotic scene far off that seemed to taint the natural tapestry with its disorder. Upstream, towards the east along the river, the area had become a bloody battlefield, fully embroiled in violence that tore through the valley's tranquility. In the distance, orderly masses of soldiers moved densely across the land, their banners fluttering in the bright sun, reflecting the metallic sheen of iron armor and swords. At the heart of the fiercest battle, the thunderous cries of combat and the neighing of war horses filled the air above the riverbanks. Squads of armored cavalry wove through a rain of arrows, thundering on horseback, and rows of infantry collided again and again, leaving countless bodies strewn upon the ground. Even from this great distance, Leon could still hear the deep bellowing of the war horns. As he watched the two large armies engage in bloody combat, a sense of relief rose in Leon's heart. Although they had lost their way in the woods, they had fortunately avoided the most dangerous place. Judging by the size, there must be thousands. The army to the north must be that of the Orland people. Azarian squinted, trying to discern the banners on the battlefield, but from their vantage point atop the cliff, it was too difficult to see clearly. Have we already entered Orland territory? Did we just happen to stumble upon a simultaneous battle between the Canadar people and the Northerners? Lokak scratched his head in puzzlement as he watched the intense fighting by the riverside. We're still close to the border of both countries, but we're probably still within Maymur County, Azarian said, pointing towards the mountains far beyond the plain. If I'm not mistaken, those should be the Garrick Mountains to the north of Maymur County, which means we haven't left Canadar yet. So, the battle we're witnessing, instead of the Canadar people invading Orland, it's actually the Orland people taking advantage of the situation to invade Canadar. Leon stroked his chin, surmising. His original judgment was largely correct. He had simply not accounted for the Orland people actually initiating a war against Canadar due to his unfamiliarity with the Northern Kingdom. That's actually good news. By a laurel above, I hope the Orland people make those bastards' blood flow like a river. Lokak's eyes lit up with expectation as he looked again toward the battlefield, wishing he could join the ranks of the Northern Kingdom's army to avenge his parents' deaths. TSK, if only I could join them right now. Leon shook his head resignedly. What's the rush? People like you, with combat training, will find plenty of opportunities to join their army once we reach Orland, especially since they're at war and definitely recruiting soldiers. Without lingering, the group continued on their way, traveling west along the edge of the cliff. As Azarian had suggested, since they could see the Garrick Mountains, they were very close to the border. Now, whether they headed west or north, either direction would lead them to Orland's territory, but the northern route was unquestionably not an option. Therefore, they had to attempt to bypass by going west through the forest. After a whole day of slow trekking west through the forest, they followed the frequent signs of animal activity to find a nearby water source. After filling their water flasks, they set up camp on a clearing near a large exposed rock. Their luck held that day. Before nightfall, Leon managed to catch an animal resembling a fox near the water source. Having exhausted their supplies, this prey provided a much-needed hearty meal. The group sat around the campfire, chatting idly to pass the time before sleep. Leon casually asked his two companions, "What are your plans once we get to Orland?" Lokak said resolutely, "I have to save my sister, but I don't know where she is, so I want to join the Orland army first. That way I can make some money, and with money, I can start looking for my sister. If I can earn more on the battlefield, maybe I can buy her freedom from the slave master one day." Leon was somewhat surprised by Lokak's response, having assumed that the boy, filled with hatred for Canadar, would have chosen violent force to reclaim his family from Canadar people's grasp. Seeing Leon's surprised look, Lokak felt a bit embarrassed. "Hey, don't look at me like that. I've thought about what you said before. You're right, I'm alone and weak. No matter how much I hate those Canadar bastards, blind aggression would just end up getting my sister and me killed." He gripped his sword tightly. "The most important thing is to rescue my sister. As for my parents' revenge, there will always be time later for those butchers to pay their blood debt." Leon felt a touch of relief as he watched this brash and fearless young man. Finally, he set a clear goal for survival. Joining the Orland army is an option, but as for me, I might try to seek employment with a local lord. Azarian added some branches to the fire and continued, "I can read and write, and I know noble etiquette. If I could become an attendant to a noble, that would be ideal. At worst, I could handle the accounts for a lord or copybooks. If Cantadar withdraws from Rolanter City later, I'll find a way to return. And you, Leon? Asked Lokak. After thinking it over, Leon felt a bit lost. Besides finding a way to survive, he didn't have any long-term plans. Joining the army with Lokak was one path. After all, the original Leon was proficient with a bow and arrow, and his archery skills were not bad. However, being a soldier in these tumultuous times was risky, and there was a good chance he'd end up as cannon fodder on the battlefield. Could he perhaps find work with nobility, like Azarian suggested? Maybe a local lord needed a hunter. As for seeking revenge against the Canadar people for the death of his family, Leon did feel sympathy for the original owner of the body due to the tragic events he had suffered, but he also knew that these were not his memories. If there were an opportunity, he wouldn't mind avenging the original Leon, but if it meant paying with his own life, then it hardly seemed worthwhile. Anyway, once this difficult escape was over, perhaps it would be time for the three of them to part ways. Night fell quickly, and sparse insect chirps accompanied the sinister shadows of swaying trees. Besides the crackling of the campfire, only the intimidating sound of wind flowing through the forest remained. Having slept through the first half of the night, Leon was quickly awakened to take over the guard shift from his companion. Fortunately, he had already gotten used to such erratic sleeping schedules during their escape. The forest at midnight was terrifyingly quiet, the feeble moonlight barely able to pierce through the dense canopy of trees. Beyond the small area illuminated by the campfire was pitch darkness. Leon stared blankly into the profound blackness of the night, sometimes pondering future paths, but more often simply zoning out without purpose. Standing guard meant sitting through several tedious hours until dawn. The extreme dullness made Leon miss his smartphone and computer for his past life on Earth every single moment. What's that? Fireflies? Leon squinted, focusing on the faint flickering lights in the darkness until he noticed more and more pairs of reflective spots. All at once, his blood seemed to freeze. Those weren't fireflies. Those were pairs of eyes, reflecting the light of the campfire. Everyone get up! Danger! Leon yelled, waking his companions. Rising to his feet, he gripped a pitchfork, aiming it at the shifting shadows concealed in the dark. Lokak and Azarian, who had been sleeping lightly, were startled awake almost instantly. They hesitated not a moment longer, grabbing their weapons and leaping to their feet, standing alert on either side of Leon. What is it? Lokak maintained his composure, holding a sword in one hand and removing a rudimentary pine resin torch from his bag with the other. He thrust it into the campfire to ignite it, waving the light across the camp's shadowy perimeter. The dim glow of the flames skimmed across the dense forest in front, revealing the contours of the creatures hiding there, whose ugly, contorted faces emitted strange cries, trying to shield their eyes from the glaring light. It was then that Leon finally saw what those things were. Goblins? The name flashed through Leon's mind. With their bald and hideous heads topped with sharp ears, their stark naked, dwarf-like humanoid figures were all too similar to the minor foes he remembered from fantasy works of his past memories. Still, he noticed differences between these creatures and the goblins of his recollection. Their skin was brown, not green, and their faces more resembled those of canids than humans, with sharp teeth and twisted, fierce expressions. However, similar to the goblins from his memory, these beings clearly were not simple, mindless wild beasts. Leon could see in their claws either rough, short spears or rusty, broken knives picked up from who knew where. They were obviously capable of using tools and weapons. Littlewood demons? No, wild goblins. Azarian was the first to identify this evil life form that was practically only known from books. Leon furrowed his brow. The original owner of the body had lived near the forest with his father for so long, yet had never seen such creatures. Although he had come to accept the fact that he was now in the other world due to previous experiences with spells, this was still his first time witnessing such otherworldly, non-human intelligent life with his own eyes. What? Wild goblins? Aren't those just stories invented by adults to scare children? Lokak looked incredulously at the little monsters before him. It's normal for you to have never seen them. The monsters and demons near Holy Land City were wiped out by the church and the army 100 years ago, Azrian said gravely. But his calm was only on the surface. The young man was in turmoil as well. According to the records in the bestiary, although these little monsters posed no threat to an army, the records did indicate that they could attack and kill lone travelers at night. In large numbers, wild goblins might even attempt to raid villages at night. And at that moment, with just the three of them, they were undoubtedly seen as prey by the wild goblins. Realizing they had been exposed, the wild goblins hiding among the trees screeched in shrill, unpleasant voices. Cackling, they leaped out from the bushes, brandishing their weapons and surrounding Leon and his comrades in small groups. Leon, watching the fierce little creatures with bared teeth encircling them, felt a chill crawl over his scalp. How do we deal with these bastards? Do we fight them, or do we just break out and lose them? If the book isn't wrong, these guys have night vision. If we leave the fire and run into the forest, it's even more dangerous because we can't see the path. It'd be the end if we fell into one of their traps. Azrian tightened his grip on his round shield and pitchfork. Let's hold out until daylight. Wild goblin eyes fear sunlight. They will return to their nests before the sun rises. Watch out! Lokak, with sharp eyes, spotted a shadow coming from the darkness. Azrian quickly raised a shield in front of his companions, blocking the incoming short spear with a thud. The rough spearhead and the somewhat insufficient force couldn't even penetrate the round shield. Though this spear throw did not succeed, it was like a starting gun, prompting the many wild goblins to howl and charge forward. Crack! Crack! The wild goblins waved their crude weapons and screeched as they pounced toward the prey in the camp. Fuck your mother! After the initial shock, Leon no longer feared the goblin-like creatures. He stepped forward steadily and thrust his three-pronged fork at the nearest enemy with a mighty swing. The leading wild goblin agilely dodged and lifted its arm, the rusty broken knife firmly blocking Leon's thrust, but it staggered back, and the other two wild goblins took the opportunity to swing their weapons directly at Leon's body. Unlike the wild beasts faced during hunting, these creatures with savage intelligence understood the power of weapons and countered accordingly. However, when his strike was blocked, Leon did not panic. The situation before him barely fell within the range of his past life's gun skills, especially since he had a substantial advantage in size and arm length over these small creatures. Quickly stepping back and retracting his pole, he twisted his body, pulled back the fork that had been blocked, and swiftly thrust diagonally, flipping the inattentive wild goblin on his left to the ground. The sharpened iron point pierced directly into the old goblin's eye socket, causing it to scream as its eyeball burst and blood splattered. Leon didn't linger to watch, immediately stabilizing his stance and swinging his pole horizontally with both hands, scaring back the newly advancing wild goblin in the middle. The fort's momentum didn't diminish, and it knocked down another swing from the wild goblin on the right. Leon resolved the encirclement with a near miss and, amidst the tension, felt his adrenaline surging. Before the fork fully fell, he pushed the tail pole again, fiercely lifting it. Poochie! The three-pronged fork's sharp head abruptly entered the unprotected abdomen of the right-side wild goblin. The creature, in pain, grabbed the fork's head in its belly. Leon roared and forcefully dragged the fork, pushing its body towards the other wild goblins still coming at him. The severely injured wild goblin involuntarily knocked over its fellows behind it, rolling and howling with 3 vicious blood holes in its belly. Leon took the opportunity to swiftly retreat a few steps back to the campfire, adjusting his slightly disordered breathing rhythm. Catching a glimpse from the corner of his eye, Lokak, clad in chain armor, was rapidly slashing and thrusting with a torch in one hand and an armed sword in the other. With wide swings, 4 or 5 wild goblin bodies already lay by Lokak's feet. Wearing chain armor and an iron helmet, he showed no fear of the enemy's crude weapons. Any wild goblin daring to face him would be chopped down within 2 moves. Compared to Lokak's fierceness, Azarian was much more cautious. He never strayed far from Leon's side, holding a round shield and a fork, repelling several attacks from the left flank and steadily protecting his companion's flanks. Lokak's eyes red, seemingly caught up in the thrill of the kill, he unknowingly charged into the midst of the wild goblins, hacking left and right, his chain armor quickly stained red with blood. Suddenly, a stone-bound lock thrown from the darkness aimed for Lokak's ankle. The stone weight spun and entangled the young man's legs, and the unprepared Lokak was suddenly pulled and tripped to the ground. Goblins lurking in the shadows began to exert force, attempting to drag this most threatening armored target into the dark bushes. Upon falling, Lokak immediately swung his sword to cut the rope at his feet, but two opportunistic wild goblins emerged from the dark, smashing at him with short spears and short knives. "Get away!" In the nick of time, Azarian, who had always been keeping an eye on his companions, had somehow already arrived. He charged with his shield, knocking aside the wild goblins by Lokak. Leon also noticed his companion's peril. No longer indulging in battling his current foes, he waved his fork to repel the enemies, rushing over with Azarian to help Lokak stand up. "Back off! Everyone stay away from the bushes," Leon called out loudly to the two, fighting and retreating as they once again gathered by the campfire, narrowly saving what could have been a situation of being picked off one by one. The cries that pierced the silence of the dense forest continued for another several minutes, and during that short time, about a dozen more wild goblin bodies were added around them. These bloodthirsty wild goblins were undeniably fierce, but the three seasoned youths were by no means mere vegetarians, both in the literal and metaphorical sense. The smell of blood that filled the clearing soon calmed the impulsiveness of the surrounding wild goblins. They circled the youths, confronting them with roars, yet hesitating to engage in a bloody showdown. Seizing the moment, Azarian cleverly picked up a still barely alive wild goblin from the ground with his fork's tip. Clasping the fork's shaft under his arm, he lifted the dying creature, displaying its dying kin to the hesitating wild goblins around. Crack! Crack! The wild goblins raised their weapons, seemingly further enraged by Azarian's provocation and intimidation. Some impulsive ones attempted to move forward, only to be pushed back by Leon and the others' iron forks and sharp swords. Gradually, the continuous intimidation took effect, signs of wavering and retreat appearing among the snapping wild goblins. Even these inherently bloodthirsty creatures were weighing the basic pros and cons, having already suffered significant losses from their failed ambush and brief skirmish. Hidden in the dense forest, the leader of the wild goblins reluctantly looked at the prey clad in armor. Even if they attacked en masse regardless of casualties, there was still a chance to kill the opponent, but the cost seemed too great. If they continued to lose their kin, they wouldn't be able to survive in this dangerous forest. After much consideration, he had no choice but to abandon the enticing spoils of war. A cacophony of cackles erupted from the woods, and upon hearing the retreat command, the wild goblins on the clearing threatened Leon and his two companions with fierce roars before slowly retreating back into the dense forest. Watching the figures of the wild goblins gradually disappear, it took several minutes before the surroundings were completely quiet and Leon and his companions could finally relax and breathe deeply. Being able to make them retreat, knowing the difficulty, was already the best outcome. Despite appearing to handle these small monsters splendidly, that was just a state driven by a short burst of adrenaline. After all, being mere mortals, prolonged confrontation with these small creatures, already exhausted from days of fleeing, would have inevitably drained their strength. They would have sooner or later become injured due to exhaustion, just like Lokak, who nearly got caught in a trap just moments ago. Don't let your guard down yet. Wild goblins are cunning. We need to be wary of them counterattacking before dawn. Azarian warned his companions not to be complacent. The group retreated to the campfire side. Recovering their strength while on alert, they continued to watch the dark forest intently, waiting for daylight. After an agonizing, indefinite wait, just when the three were gradually convinced the wild goblins had left for good, Leon suddenly heard a faint rustling sound from the forest ahead. "Do you guys hear anything?" No sooner had he finished asking than the sound became clearer. It was not just the sound of running brushing against branches and bushes, but also mingled with the familiar screams of the wild goblins. The fearful screams of the wild goblins grew louder, and the ground faintly trembled until, accompanied by a thunderous sound of trees being knocked down, the cries abruptly stopped. Roar! A roar that shook the forest sounded like a boulder smashing into the water. The faces of the three turned instantly pale. Even without knowing what the terrifying roar represented, they understood it was not something they could handle. "Run! Throw away anything in the way, run!" Without a moment to explain, Leon immediately discarded the useless pitchfork that presented no aid but a hindrance in facing such danger. Freeing his hands, he grabbed a torch from beside the campfire, and they started running, their backs turned to where the deafening roar came from. At this point, they could no longer worry about encountering other threats while running into the forest at night. As soon as Leon heard that distinct roar, fear drove the memories of his original owner to surge forward, luckily reminding him of what the roar represented. It was a bear's call, but not an ordinary bear. What is that? A tiger? A bear? Lokak couldn't help but shout. "Stop asking, just run. Don't stop for a second." Leon loudly called out, urging his companions to flee for their lives. His and Azarian's linen clothes quickly got torn from the dense bushes and undergrowth as they crossed the rugged terrain. Even if they accidentally fell and got covered in bruises, they would immediately get up, enduring the pain. Soon, the torch was lost somewhere, and Leon gasped for breath in the darkness, trying to ensure his companions were still by his side. Losing the light, they had to slow down until the trees around gradually thinned out and the moonlight became visible. Only then could they again accelerate their escape. If it were just an ordinary bear, though dangerous, they might have retreated calmly using the torch and the weapons in hand, not in such a disarray. But the monstrous beast behind them, with its earth-shaking roar, had fundamentally passed beyond the range of ordinary beasts. Staying even a second within its territory would be an exceedingly foolish and dangerous act. Poor mountain bear. That was a creature as large as a full-grown African elephant found on Earth, rumored to have skin and flesh so tough that steel swords could hardly make a scratch. This seldom-seen forest monster was even worshipped as a deity by remote villagers. In his memories, the original owner had the fortune to witness it from afar just once while following his father deep into secluded mountains. Even if it was just a distant glimpse across a cliff, he could never forget the terrifying vast figure. Let alone them, three boys scavenging and fleeing on the road. Even a regular army wouldn't dare challenge this true lord of the forest. Thank goodness, as long as they could quickly escape the range of the Horror Mountain Bear. Boom, rumble, bang! Leon listened to the suddenly clear sound of trees falling behind him, felt the increasingly urgent trembling of the ground beneath his feet, and a chill ran through him in an instant. What's happening? Was the Horror Mountain Bear chasing them? Was their trio the target of the Horror Mountain Bear? Why? Suddenly recalling the wild goblins that had also suffered earlier, Leon found the answer. The scent of blood. Damn! He couldn't help but curse through gritted teeth. There was no doubt. It was the smell of blood from the many wild goblin corpses they had killed that had attracted the monster. Was it for food? Or was it protective behavior? That didn't matter anymore. Listening to the increasingly alarming rumbling of running behind him, Leon felt cold sweat breaking out in urgency. The important thing was their legs could not outrun the Horror Mountain Bear, getting closer and closer. What should they do? How could they escape this monster that was about to catch up? Ahead! There's a river ahead. Lokak, running at the front, turned back breathlessly to inform everyone, swim across or go around. He was startled in a momentary speechlessness by the vast, horrifying shadow from behind everyone. Turning his head, Lokak, as if his body's potential had been activated, increased his pace even more, fleeing like the wind. Following Lokak's direction, Leon's gaze sharpened. Indeed, there was a river ahead, reflecting the hazy moonlight, its rushing waters loudly flowing. unknown to where. "Jump into the river!" Leon shouted without thinking. The river was turbulent, but they had no time for hesitation. Not even daring to look back to check how close the gigantic creature was to them now. The trio reached the riverbank and, without stopping, leapt one after the other into the raging waters. Bang! 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 The three young men entered the water and, in the blink of an eye, were swept downstream by the rapid current. Boom rumble! Boom rumble! The heavy running sound gradually stalled at the riverbank. Roar! The ferocious king of the forest emitted a terrifying roar that vibrated through the wilderness. The giant bear lowered its massive head. It could still smell the scent of those invaders who had entered its territory, slowly fading away. The river water could not block its keen sense of smell, but it slowly lifted its head, gazing towards the distant end of the river. The Horror Mountain bear instinctively took a few steps back. The domain at the end of this river, even the king of the forest would fear. The rushing river waters completely scattered the three boys, and they drifted further and further downstream amid the waves. Encircled by icy torrents, Leon realized his mistake. He had underestimated the strong force of this rapid. Wave after wave pounded against his body, and with nowhere to draw support from, everything around him blurred. Amid the churning confusion, he soon found himself inevitably choking on water. The sense of powerlessness to rise to the surface grew more apparent. No matter how he tried to keep calm, hold his breath, and maintain his balance, his already scarce strength continued to deplete in the relentless torrents, like a merciless giant hand dragging him deep into the waters. As the river consumed him completely, his consciousness faded along with his dwindling strength. How were Azarian and the others? Were they still in the water? Was he himself going to die? Pain, repression, silence. The river water, backflowing into his body, gradually solidified Leon's lingering consciousness amid suffocation. He began to accept that this might be his end. A visitor from another dimension, soon to drown at this deep riverbed. What a sudden, absurd finale. Unable to struggle any longer, the boy's body sank deeper until it slowly dropped to the riverbed. Should I call you lucky or unlucky? Leon opened his eyes once again. Yet those originally black eyes now sparkled with bright gold in the profound darkness. We must make it quick. Leon skillfully turned in the water, with his hands deftly sweeping the river waters to draw runes. Unknown forces quickly isolated the surrounding currents. In the next instant, he shot out from the riverbed, his body swimming swiftly like a fish. In the pitch-black waters, Leon now almost ignored the rapid undercurrents below the surface. Found them. The golden eyes scanned the darkness. He twisted and broke through the water, darting toward another boy still tumbling on the river surface. On the river surface, Azarian was still struggling desperately in the rapids. He had used every skill he possessed, but even good swimming skills couldn't withstand the cruel reality of his draining strength. Suddenly, the boy felt a massive force bump from below. Then, he was pushed away from the tumultuous waters and flew up. Boom! The river's surface exploded dramatically, and within the splashing waves, Leon leaped up. Holding Lokak in one hand and grabbing Azarian's arm with the other, he soared high from the water and gracefully landed on the rocky riverbank. Barely steady, Leon loosened his grip, dropping Lokak and Azarian. His body swayed as the golden glow in his eyes suddenly faded. Ugh! Ugh! Suddenly regaining consciousness, Leon painfully collapsed to the ground. His head bowed as he vomited incessantly. The river water gushed from his throat like opening a floodgate, massive torrents spilling onto the ground. He felt as if he was about to vomit out his stomach and lungs. Dazed, Azarian looked on bewildered. His mind hadn't caught up to the situation. One moment he thought he was about to die, and the next he was unexpectedly thrown to the shore. But quickly, seeing another companion collapsed on the ground, unsure of life or death, Azarian snapped back to reality. hurried over to Lokak to administer first aid in a flurry of actions, stripping off his chain armor and clothing, applying water, and pressing on his chest and lungs, finally hearing the painful coughing of awakening. Cough, cough, cough. Lokak choked and coughed up the river water inside him, twisting his head to vomit for a while, before weakly opening his eyes. Huff, are we saved? Lokak panted, glanced at the chain armor stripped off by his companion. His helmet had been lost as soon as he fell into the water, but he wasn't able to remove the chain armor in time in the water, which made him sink to the bottom first. It's a miracle you could even pull me ashore. I'll never be foolish enough to enter water with armor on again. Azarian, with legs that had given way, collapsed onto the ground. Listening to Lokak's thanks, he gave a bitter smile and shook his head, pointing at the even more disheveled Leon, lying not far away. I wasn't even able to save myself. How could I save you? I didn't even know where the river took you. It was still Leon who dragged us up. Azarian couldn't understand how he had managed to fly them to the shore from the water, but wisely chose not to delve deeper into his companion's secrets. Finally catching his breath, Leon wiped his face with his hand, exhaustedly slumped onto the ground, barely managing a strained laugh in response. Leon still remembered what had happened in the water, his body being controlled to navigate through the river by a mysterious force. It all indicated that he was once again saved by the unknown being that had helped him before. She's here. She must have been watching over him. Unable to restrain his gratitude and curiosity any longer, Leon silently called out in his heart, "Are you still there?" After waiting a while, still there was no reply. He couldn't help but wonder if he was assuming too much. Perhaps that being couldn't communicate via mental consciousness? This time, not fearing being overheard by others as before when the mercenaries were escorting him, Leon simply opened his mouth and loudly asked into the air, Hey, are you still here?" The two boys beside him looked at Leon puzzled, unaware of whom he was speaking to. However, only Leon could hear the voice that emerged from within his heart. "Hey, I'm here. I'm here. Why are you shouting so loudly?" The faint voice of a young girl complained. Only this time, her voice sounded clearer and smoother. At last, Leon heard the much-awaited concrete response and was overjoyed. "I'm sorry. I was just trying to see if I needed to speak a bit louder for you to hear me." He scratched his wet hair as he spoke, his heart filled with excitement. Not only because he had finally confirmed the guess that had troubled him since that day, but also because he was excited about the presence of a friendly being with extraordinary powers residing within him. If he were the protagonist of those web novels he had seen in his previous life, could this be his personal grandpa? Or perhaps Miss? But who exactly was she? The soul of a local person from this world? Or like him, a transmigrator soul for some other time and space? Numerous speculations leapt to his mind. "There's no need to shout. I can always hear you calling without you having to speak. I just ignored you before," the pleasant voice lazily replied. Leon felt a bit embarrassed by the straightforward statement that she had ignored him, but he had no hard feelings, considering she had saved his life twice. "I'm sorry." Leon obediently closed his mouth, switching back to a mental conversation. "I just wanted to thank you for intervening. It's all right. Don't overthink it. I don't have anything against you." The girl's voice continued. "You have many questions, and so do I, but I am too weak now. If I hadn't fallen into this place, I might not be able to maintain a conversation right now. Speaking of which, I never noticed that day." Before the mysterious consciousness could finish speaking, Leon heard Azarian's cry of alarm. Leon! Interrupted in his spiritual exchange, Leon puzzledly pulled his awareness back to the present reality. "What's the matter?" He quickly looked toward his companions. He saw Lokak, for some reason, staring dumbfounded upward at the sky, while Azarian gestured around them with a shrug. Only then did Leon notice the strangeness of the environment around him. Previously too eager to converse with the voice in his mind after barely escaping death, he had not taken the time to observe his surroundings. Now, regaining his spirit and looking around, he realized the visibility around them had become eerily clear. If it had been broad daylight, there would have been nothing strange about it. But if his memory was still intact and had not been muddled, He remembered it should be a crescent moon in the middle of the night. Whether it was the fierce encounter with the wild goblins earlier or the subsequent desperate flight to avoid the fearsome mountain bear, and even including the recent experience of falling into the water, none of these events could have extended the time to dawn. They had landed in a sparsely wooded area when they fell into water, and even under the moonlight, it was still difficult to see the forest floor and the deadly river. But now, Leon swallowed hard. The forest was still a forest, and the river before them was still the one that had almost swallowed them. But everything around them exhibited an indescribably strange clarity. It was not the brightness of daylight under the sun, but rather, everything seemed as if it had been overlaid with a faded filter, creating an eerie scene where everything was shrouded in a mysterious, hazy color. Following Lokak's stunned gaze, Leon raised his head and, like him, was left dumbfounded. Above them, there was no sun, no moon, no stars. The entire unattainable canopy of the sky was an endless dark and mottled spectacle, murky shadows intertwining and surging across the horizon like a sea of pitch-black oil. What place is this? Lokak's brain seemed about to crash, as even the terrifying forest creature they had faced before did not instill as much fear as the current sight. Lokak looked bewilderedly at his companions. Could it be that we have actually drowned? Is this the afterlife? Leon's eyebrows furrowed tightly. Calm down, don't talk nonsense. We are definitely still alive. Azarian seemed to regain his sanity, hesitantly starting to speak with an uncertain tone. All of you, you must have heard the story of the Despair Plain, right? Lokak widened his eyes, then surveyed their surroundings repeatedly before confirming. You mean, we've entered the Cursed Land? Leon's memory surged, and he immediately understood Azarian's reference. It was a childhood bedtime story, repeatedly told by his parents and well known in the Syrian kingdom. The story Azarian mentioned about Despair Plain was not an unknown rare mystery, but rather a folk tale familiar to every household in the Syrian kingdom. The legends described territories cursed in various remote corners of the continent. They hid countless treasures and man-eating demons. The cursed land could sometimes be deep in a vast forest, other times in empty plains or deserts. But invariably, these places share a common description. In that God-forsaken plain of despair, there was no sky, no sun, moon, or stars, and no boundaries. Once accidentally entered, there was no chance of returning alive. The Cursed Land, this name does seem fitting. Do you know what place this is? Hearing the young girl's voice in his mind again, Leon inexplicably felt a wave of comfort. He realized that instead of making wild guesses here, the mysterious consciousness within him, capable of wielding magic, must indeed know more about the current peculiar environment. Spirit-like field, that is this domain's true name. The girl's voice suddenly turned a little somber, her ethereal and elusive tone tinged with unspoken sorrow. Under the gloomy and twisted dark canopy, a terrifyingly gray forest stretched as far as the eye could see, and deep within the dimly lit wooded land, the dark thicket rustled with the wind, sounding eerily like ghostly whispers. Piled upon each other, the trees resembled a labyrinth with no signs of life within the profound thicket, void of any animal or insect sounds. The only presence was an eerie, decaying scent lingering around Leon and his two companions. The trio murmured something under their breath. Azarian and Lokak were reciting prayers from the Holy Sun Church. As for Leon, who led the group, what came out of his mouth was far more bizarre. If one listened carefully, they would discover he was softly humming. The Internationale. It was a workaround, as Leon, as a transmigrator, didn't believe in the Holy Sun and the Holy Prophet of Syrian, so the prayers from the church memorized by the original owner of the body couldn't help him concentrate and stop his thoughts from wandering. Thus, racking his brain, the only thing he came up with that could consolidate his will and thus decrease the likelihood of attracting a demon's attention was relying on those belief-filled things from his previous life. A round of the Internationale, followed by the national anthem, and when tired, reciting the 24 characters of the true word over and over. Whether it made sense or not, according to the mysterious voice, as long as it could keep his emotions and was steady and focused, it would work. So each of them recited their own and simply moved forward, turning when encountering terrain obstacles, turning back when entering a dead end, with no real sense of direction or destination. In this strange realm, north, south, east, and west were all meaningless. Even their sense of time became blurry and unclear. This seemed not just a delusion caused by losing one's way. Inside this spirit-like field, all perceptions appeared even more vague and chaotic than in reality. At the riverbank some 10 minutes earlier, "I've helped you so many times. How about we make a promise this time?" proposed the mysterious young girl's voice. "What promise?" Leon countered. "I'll figure out a way to get you out of here. But in return, you have to promise to help me with something once we're successful." Without hesitation, Leon nodded in agreement. "I already owe you my life twice over, and from the standpoint of repaying a favor, it's only right. I promise you, as long as it's nothing immoral, I'll try my best to help." "All right, it's a deal. Now, can you explain in detail what this spirit-like field is and how exactly we're supposed to get out of this damn place?" Leon asked urgently. "The spirit-like field, one of the sad fates for a spirit realm mage," said the young girl's voice. "When a spirit realm mage's control of chaotic energy exceeds the threshold that their will and body can endure, the backlash of chaos magic will eventually transform them into a gateway between the real world and the spirit realm. The erosion flooding out from behind the gate will step by step contaminate the surrounding reality until the entire real world is dragged into the spirit realm." "I don't quite understand," Leon said, feeling somewhat impressive but confused by the description, as he was a mundane earthling. "The reason for the formation of this domain can't be explained in a few words. After all, you definitely weren't a mage before you reanimated in this boy's body, so discussing such knowledge about the spirit realm with you is pointless," sighed the young girl's voice. Hearing the other party's astonishing revelation, Leon's heart jolted. He didn't expect that she had already discovered he wasn't the original owner of this body. "You know I'm not the original Leon? Isn't that obvious?" The young girl's voice seemed self-evident. Leon felt a visceral unease at being seen through. Could it be that she could not only communicate with him spiritually, but also read his memories? "Don't be nervous. I just inherited the memories of that deceased boy, just like you." The young girl's voice seemed to detect Leon's reaction and went on to explain. "I've been watching your actions the entire way and naturally could deduce from your behavior that there are differences between you and that dead hunter boy. I know what you're worried about, but rest assured in my current state, I have no spare energy to read your soul." That was a relief. Hearing her say this, whether true or false, Leon chose for the moment to believe her. Although as a mere earthly office drone with nothing particularly secretive about him other than the unique origin of an otherworld transmigrator, it was still better not to disclose one's privacy if possible. Who hasn't harbored some inconvenient thoughts or a dark history that they'd rather keep hidden since childhood? Some things aren't just socially awkward, they're beyond embarrassing. Back to this place, the cursed land of legend is said to be boundless. Is that true or false? Leon brought his attention back to the predicament at hand. Although the content of the legend is full of fallacies, regretfully, this realm is indeed far more dangerous than the folk tales suggest. You'd better pray that the spirit realm mage responsible for giving birth to this spirit-like field wasn't too powerful before his demise. Otherwise, it would be troublesome. The girl's voice carried a hint of helplessness. This domain, eroded by chaotic energy, has clearly existed for a very long time. The surrounding environment has become half-spiritualized. Directions and positions are all in disarray. No matter which way you go, you'll end up going around in circles within this time-space. Naturally, ordinary people can't find their way out. Well, strictly speaking, not even flying is possible. Approaching the projection of the chaos sea overhead is no different from actively seeking death. Then, is this damned place like what the stories say, teeming with man-eating evil demons? That's not quite it. How should I put it? All creatures sensitive to magic power naturally stay away from the spirit-like field. Even the unlucky ones who blunder into this place don't survive long. In the end, they perish just like ordinary humans and become walking corpses, unable to return their souls to the Dead Sea. So, if you do encounter something, they're just victims in the same plight as you are. You mentioned perish? Perish by what? Leon seized on the crucial point. Of course, it's the undead who can't rest their souls in the Dead Sea, which means those who accidentally entered before you and met their end here, be it people or wild beasts. But being harmed by wandering souls isn't the worst fate you could suffer here. Although Leon had no clear idea what being unable to return one's soul to the Dead Sea entailed, it sounded like eternal damnation. What could be worse than that? The girl's voice became serious. Aside from the wandering souls, there exists another danger within the spirit-like field. Those demons born in the spirit realm who spy on souls. Demons, or more accurately, the girl referred to them as spirit realm demons. She didn't waste time explaining these dangerous and evil beings to Leon, only wanting him to quickly grasp the imminent crisis at hand. Spirit realm demons can appear in the actual plane of reality, but the spirit-like field is a time-space already eroded by fissures of the spirit realm. The chaotic energy here has long since turned it into a special region between the spirit realm and reality. Here, demons can partially pass through the fissures, projecting themselves into the spirit-like field. Of course, the real draw bringing them here is the abundant emotions, desires, and intense spiritual fluctuations of the intelligent beings who wander into this realm. Leon listened quietly. Having already seen magic and wild goblins, things that surpass his knowledge, he wasn't surprised at the notion of supernatural demons existing in this other world. The problem now was in this damn place where there seemed to be no escape to heavens or earth, whether it was the so-called spirit realm demons or the undead trapped souls. Neither sounded like something they could handle. To avoid attracting the attention of demons, you must control your emotions and will, especially forget any unnecessary desires and greed. In such a place, the more complex and changeable the spiritual fluctuations, the more visible you are to the spirit realm demons. You must avoid falling into intense emotions like fear, panic, and anger. The more resolute your will, the calmer your spirit, the harder it is for demons to detect you in the spirit realm, the girl's voice advised. If you have a deity you believe in, you can also try praying to them. This can be very effective for believers, she further suggested. Leon looked over at Azarian and Lokak upon hearing this. As traditional Syrian, they naturally had a steadfast belief in Saint Sol and Saint Alaryl of the Holy Sun Church. He himself was in trouble. As an atheistic earthly muggle, he had never believed in any god. Moreover, in terms of emotional and desire complexity, being from the colorful modern world of Earth, he probably shone like a disco ball in the eyes of the spirit realm demons compared to the other two simpler and more innocent native lads, right? So, you're saying that if we keep our minds clear of all distractions, we could safely get out of this place? Leon ventured to ask. Of course not. That's just how you move around in the spirit-like field inconspicuously. To get out, you need to gather materials for me here. I will teach you to make an earth vein spirit lamp and then turn it into a temporary guide instrument. That's the only way to save yourselves and return to reality now. No other plan will work. You can find the materials you need in this kind of place? Leon asked incredulously. Let's see. Hades crystals, well, those probably aren't here, but shining flint stone, river sandstone, eucalyptus would, so I just walk around. The process of making an earth vein spirit lamp isn't complicated, and the materials are all common things found in the forest. As we walk, I will let you know if we come across them. The only troublesome part is the final spark source. What is that? The last material I need is a soul. A wandering soul trapped here that yearns to return home. My heart is sincere. May you protect me. In the brilliance of your light, may my heart be as steady as a rock. Lokak stumbled through the prayer in his heart, sometimes unable to remember a segment. He could only mumble, through with other vague words of prayer. He wasn't lacking in devotion, nor did he disbelieve Leon's warnings. It was just that his level of education made it impossible to memorize the lengthy chants recited by the church priests. During collective prayers in the past, he only needed to follow the leader and didn't have to remember everything. After all, the future he had envisioned for himself was merely to become a soldier in Rolanter City, like his father, not to aspire to one day become a church clergy spreading the faith. The youth picked out the inconspicuous broken rock from the rubble, his mind grumbling. Could this thing really be of any use? It wasn't that he doubted its use, but the eerie and sinister surroundings gradually made him anxious, and the stories of this place ran through Lokak's mind over and over. What used to be folk tales to fool children now troubled the boy deeply. Legends told of countless greedy thugs craving the treasures of the cursed land, but whether it was an ambitious king, a noble and brave knight, or a greedy and cunning explorer, in the end they all got lost in the terrifying Despair Plain and never returned to the world. Even in some special versions of the stories where a protagonist managed to return to the world with the treasures, those who came back, no matter how brave and noble they were before, were no longer the same upon their return. Without exception, they would fall into corruption, becoming evil beings cursed by their own doing. That's why the fictitious plain used as the setting in those stories was called the Cursed Land. Amidst his palpitations, Lokak looked up at Leon, who was sketching something on the ground not far away, and felt a little reassured. If it hadn't been for this companion, whom he'd met in a cage, he might still be wearing shackles and being herded like cattle, or he might have been beaten to death by a slave master in some reckless struggle. Although he was still in danger, he believed that this miraculous companion must have a way to get through this difficult time. But even if we get out, what then? Lokak frowned involuntarily. Looking at the meaningless rock in his hand, the youth's heart suddenly filled with intense revulsion. Yes, I survived, but what about my sister? The tragic scenes he had witnessed in that village recently haunted the youth like a nightmare. The remains of a young girl, violated and killed by thugs. That cruel scene cut in a Lokak's psyche like a knife's edge. In a trance, the face of the pathetic girl seemed to morph into his sister's visage. The decapitated head of a male corpse, rolling on the ground, turned into his father's face, that painful, twisted visage, with decaying eyes full of profound disappointment. I escaped from Canadar, and I left my sister all alone in the hands of those beasts. How much longer until I can find my sister? Is she still alive? How much longer can she survive in the hands of those bastards? Ashamed, Lokak hung his head, unable to hold back the tears that were welling up. It's just me now. His body suddenly felt the familiar warmth of an embrace. The youth looked up blankly, seeing his mother's gentle face. Don't cry anymore, my dear little wild horse, my brave child. His mother affectionately called out his childhood nickname, looking at her child with caring eyes. Mom, Mom. Lokak closed his eyes, embracing his mother ardently. The jarring sound of mocking laughter frightened him as he opened his eyes in terror. He suddenly felt himself falling, as countless hands reaching out from the darkness dragged his mother into the abyss. His closest kin were violated before his eyes, their mutilated bodies carved by the thugs' blades. Lokak roared in fury, but his open mouth emitted no sound. Everything quieted down. The youth stared blankly at his sister in front of him. His blood-stained kin stared at her brother with a piteous smile. You're the only one scraping by, why? Lokak, why didn't you save me? Within his blood-red vision, only that figure stood out so strikingly, so hatefully. Yes, it was him. It was he who was hindering your rescue. No. He's always been helping me. The youth's face twisted horribly in his struggle. Because he needs your help? He's so hypocritical. He just needs you to work for him. And you're just a coward given a false reason to cling to life by him. No, I'm not. The girl, covered in scars, embraced him from behind, her beautiful and gentle face whispering softly into his ear. Prove it to me, my dear brother. Saint Soul above, we bow our heads in worship. Your light shines like a torch, gracing all beings. at the dawn of heaven and earth, the mother of all creatures. We pray for the Holy Sun to cast its gaze upon us, bestow wisdom, grant courage. By the command of Alaral, bring down your kindness and shelter us. May your radiance forever cleanse our souls, guiding us in innocence, clarity, and purity as at the beginning, all the way to heaven. Azarian recited the church's prayer with practiced ease, while deftly searching the rocky creek bank for the green stones Leon had described. Although he had no idea what purpose gathering these stones served, he dared not slack off in his efforts. After all, everyone's hope of escaping this sinister forest now rested on Leon's shoulders. After 2 inconceivable brushes with death, Azarian, although he avoided speaking of the power his companions displayed, was inwardly convinced that Leon must be a wild mage outside of the church's magic ring. The powers he used were not the divine miracles of the Holy Sun's manifestation, but were the application of magic power in the casting of spells. As a descendant of nobility, Azarian had some understanding of spellcasters and magic, and he knew all too well the church's stance regarding wild mages outside of the magic ring within the Sarian kingdom. In Sarian, regardless of status, gender, or age, anyone found demonstrating the ability to cast spells was forcibly taken into custody by the church and sent directly to an institution known as the Magic Ring for recruitment and supervision. Any who did not comply would be sentenced to death on the spot, while those who did not resist and were taken into the Magic Ring. It was said that some might re-enter society years later bearing the status of a church clergy, while others would vanish without a trace. Azarian now understood why Leon had suggested heading north to the Orlan Kingdom when discussing escape routes. It was said that the Northern Kingdom, unlike the Sarian Kingdom, which was severe and strict with spellcasters, did not worship the Holy Sun and was more lenient toward magicians. Having gathered those green stones with distinctive water-like patterns on their surfaces into an old cloth, Azarian stood up, ready to return to his companions. But no sooner had he looked up than the sight before him caused him to widen his eyes and cry out loud, "Leon, watch your back!" Squatting among the trees, busy drawing runes with stone powder, Leon was suddenly startled by his companion's alarmed shout. At first, he was baffled, but he quickly reacted. He threw himself to the ground and rolled aside in a very awkward dodge. There was a dull thunk as a sword blade deeply cleaved into the soil, destroying the runic pattern he had just completed. Leon, breaking out in a cold sweat, now saw that Lokak, who was originally searching for materials by the creek, had silently appeared behind him. If it weren't for Azarian's shout just now, he might have had a shoulder blade split open by Lokak's sword. "Are you mad?" "Lokak!" Leon scrambled to the side, still in shock. This sudden betrayal by a companion was actually the closest he had come to losing his life, compared to all the dangers they had faced on their journey. However, Lokak seemed deaf to Leon's reproach, the robust youth lifting his head with a fierce look, staring intently at Leon with blood-red eyes, streaming with bloody tears. That angry and unfocused gaze was as if he was staring at his own sworn enemy. "Lokak!" Leon called out loudly to the crazed boy in front of him, being forced to keep retreating until he was blocked by a tree trunk behind him. As another swipe came at him, Leon hastily ducked to avoid it. A terrible grating sound of metal slicing would scatter the chips in all directions. The ordinary-looking armed sword had unexpectedly chopped a tree trunk, thicker than a thigh, in half. With a loud crash, the tree fell, kicking up leaves and dust. Leon and Azarian watched in disbelief as Lokak's right arm, due to his own inhuman strength from that strike, was grotesquely bent and deformed. But immediately after, Lokak's twisted arm, still grasping the sword hilt, crackled, and in a blink, flexed to reposition the bones back in place, as straight as before. Ugh, that happened quicker than expected. "Hey, if you don't want to die, run now. He's no longer your friend." A girl's voice suddenly issued a warning in Leon's mind. Leon was always amenable to good advice. He called out to Azarian, who was bewildered and still not understanding the situation, and then turned to flee into the dense woods. Lokak is possessed. Leave him. The enraged boy, with a face streaming with blood tears, roared as he gave chase. Hearing the threatening roar behind him, Leon increased the speed of his escape. At the same time, he eagerly asked in his heart, "Do you know what's wrong with him? How he suddenly went mad without any warning." "That's what I told you before, about the danger worse than death," the girl's voice sighed. "That child's soul has already been targeted by a spirit realm demon." "Demon? Can we perform an exorcism? Is there still a chance to save him?" "You're struggling to save yourself, and you still want to save him? He almost split you in two." The girl's voice sounded slightly surprised. "It was the demon who tried to split me, not Lokak. Let's talk about whether there's a way or not. If you merely want to get rid of him..." Sigh. "Never mind. It's not like there's no way. Anyway, if it comes down to it, just make a clean break. For now, focus on escaping." The girl's voice then sounded resigned. Lying quietly behind the mound of earth, Leon and Azarian endured their rapid panting. They had run until they were almost out of breath, but fortunately, they could no longer hear Lokak's crazed roar. It seemed he had already gotten lost in the chaotic forest. If Lokak had merely been confused in his mind, Leon and Azarian might have been able to find a way to subdue him. But seeing the terrifying strength with which he could cleave thick tree trunks with a single sword strike and the eerie state of recovering severed limbs, they knew this was not a force they could confront head-on. "Lokak, how did he suddenly change like that?" Azarian swallowed his saliva, still feeling the shock. "He's been possessed by a demon." Leon, nearly dead on his feet, braced his hands on his knees and gasped for air. "Huff, huff. I don't understand the specifics, but I better not fall under the same curse. I can't run anymore. If you get possessed too, remember to give me a quick death with a single blow. I'll try." Azarian pulled a stiff smile, but he really couldn't bring himself to smile at his companion's jest, recalling Lokak's terrifying face streaked with blood and tears, which sent a chill down his spine. With strict control over his wild thoughts, Azarian clasped his hands and began to silently pray to the glorious Holy Sun, his faith becoming more devout after surviving danger. Leon flopped over on the ground, his chest burning with pain as raw as fire. The continuous escapes and encounters had left him without the strength to even rise. Be grateful. It should be an angry demon controlling the boy. If it had been a desire demon or a pride demon, you probably wouldn't have been able to escape, the girl's voice teased. "There are different types of demons," Leon remarked, amazed. "Of course, but now's not the time to discuss that. You don't have time to waste. The longer you stay in this domain, the more likely your spirit is to be eroded by a spirit realm demon. Besides, that boy Lokak is just an ordinary person. If too much time passes, he'll be beyond saving," the girl's voice reminded him. "What can we do to make Lokak regain consciousness?" Leon pushed himself up and looked around. It was still a gloomy forest with layers of eerie shadows. The stream they had finally found after struggling to discern the direction was now unreachable. A pity, since he had spent so much effort following the girl's instructions to draw the magic array. "Right, we've lost Lokak, but doesn't that make it difficult to find him again in the forest?" "No need to go looking. I will make that demon come to us," the girl's voice continued. "Remember that rune formation I taught you to draw earlier?" "I roughly remember it, but didn't you say it was used to gather wandering souls and capture the undead? It can also be used to exorcise demons. As long as the formation is slightly modified, the original ritual that draws undead can also attract beings that covet souls, and demons are among those. Luckily, it's an angry demon we're dealing with. Fooling it into a trap shouldn't be hard. However, the original plan to mimic Earth Vane's spiritual power as a lure must be changed. It has no appeal to a demon." After a moment's contemplation, the girl's voice quickly came up with a plan and instructed Leon. "Next, I will teach you how to inscribe a demon exorcism array and the complete spell. Once the ritual begins, since you don't know how to use magic power and elements, I must use my spiritual body to harness the chaotic energy here as the ritual's core and bait. By then, I won't have the strength to verbally guide you to recite the spell. You must memorize every part of the spell in advance. Got it. Understood. Leon nodded affirmatively, confident in his memory. Don't take it too lightly, though. Haven't you noticed that I'm not using the language you're familiar with when I speak to you? That said, you've consistently been speaking a language that's not fellow language as well, which is quite surprising. I can't believe there's a language in this world that I haven't heard of. Is it a newly born language that came after? Musing, she began to murmur to herself, her voice growing fainter. Caught off guard by her words, Leon realized only now that he had been conversing in Chinese with the girl's voice because instinctively he used his mother tongue when talking to himself. Back to the point, my magic technique requires chanting in the ancient Lorelet language. If it's translated into fellow language or your unfamiliar language and then recited, it won't work. You must recite the original pronunciation of the spell exactly. If it were me doing it, it wouldn't be such a hassle, alas. Listen well. Rest to recover your strength now. I will recite it several times for you to hear. You must remember it. You go ahead. I'll listen carefully. Leon perked up, taking on the same determination he had for those grueling listening exams in the past, and listened quietly to the magic spell being transmitted. This time, he wasn't just trying to understand the meaning behind the words, but also focused on the girl's pleasant intonations and echoed them softly out loud in the real world. The spell, called Ancient Lorelet Language, wasn't too lengthy and was quick and concise when spoken, but Leon noticed upon careful listening that even seemingly simple and clear phrases had 5 or 6 minor and quick variations in tone. Although the girl's recitation sounded melodic, like singing poetry, when Leon tried to repeat it, his mouth stumbled as if tied up in knots. It's okay if you recite a little more slowly. Just make sure the hesitation between words doesn't exceed the time of 3 breaths. The spell will still take shape, but you can't make a mistake. If there's an error, you must start over, and we don't have many chances to do so. The girl's voice guided impatiently. Time ticked away, and as Leon gradually regained his strength, he also roughly memorized the beginning and ending parts of the spell. One to activate the summoning spirit formation, and one to activate the demon exorcism array. The girl's voice continued to instruct Leon on how to operate and set up the ritual, and also explained exactly how to wrestle Lokak's consciousness back from the demon. Lokak's soul hadn't been completely devoured by the demon, and before the situation became irretrievable, they needed to rearrange the modified summoning spirit formation. However, instead of the original core of the formation used to lure the undead, they would replace it with a pseudo-soul simulating the emotions and desires of intelligent life, but with a spiritual fluctuation intensity dozens of times higher. Based on what you're saying, wouldn't that attract even more and more terrifying spirit realm demons? Leon asked doubtfully. Relax, the pseudo-soul we're simulating is ultimately a fake constructed of magic power. It won't project in the spirit realm like a real soul, so will only trick the angry demon that has already appeared in the spirit-like field. So we just need to lure Lokak, possessed by the demon, into the array? That's the first step. Once the angry demon controls the child to enter the range of the array, you need to coordinate with me to complete the final step. The girl's voice paused briefly before continuing. We can also make use of the spirit-like field's property of isolating the life and death law. I will first activate the spirit-repelling rune to completely extract Lokak's soul from his body. Without a complete life to cling to, the demon itself attached to the soul will be exposed. Then you will. Leon was greatly shocked. Wait, extract the soul from the body. If you don't mind me asking, won't Lokak die? Generally, he would, came the girl's voice as a matter of fact. Don't panic. If we were in the outside real world, his soul would indeed be immediately cast into the Dead Sea after being extracted. But we are here in a spirit-like field, isolated from reality. Even if life perishes here, the soul cannot dissipate. As long as you chant the spell to activate the demon exorcism array immediately afterward and complete the ritual to banish the angry demon back to the spirit realm, once the dust settles, I can help you stuff Lokak's soul back into his body. After all, the spirit-repelling rune only extracts the soul. It won't harm Lokak's physical body. It took Leon quite some time to barely understand the flow of this method. Under the guidance of the girl's voice, he had to set up this summoning spirit formation and demon exorcism array to form a connected series of magical rites. Next, she would cast a spell on the array to create this pseudo-soul and lure the angry demon possessing Lokak into this magical rite. Then, through his chanting, the girl's voice would activate this spirit-repelling rune in the summoning spirit formation to peel Lokak's soul from his body. Finally, Leon must rapidly and timely chant the incantation against the exposed angry demon, initiating the demon exorcism right to send the demon back to the spirit realm. What do you think? It's still not too late to change your mind. The risk involved in this process is not small. Once the summoning rite is started, it will attract more than just that demon. The surrounding wandering souls will also be drawn in. But before the demon is tricked into the array, we cannot release the spirit-repelling rune to restrain those invading undead prematurely, or else all our efforts will be in vain. If the premature arrivals were merely living corpses of wild beasts, you might be able to deal with them. But if more powerful undead emerged, even if you give up on rescuing him, no one's going to criticize you. After all, if it weren't for the spell you and I released that day, the child wouldn't have survived until now. So you don't owe him anything, said the girl's voice, making the stakes clear for one last time. All the necessary materials are prepared. Making a guide instrument to escape this domain and back to reality as soon as possible would be the wise choice. Oh, nothing. Leon weighed the potential outcomes of attempting to save Lokak, scratching his head in anguish, somewhat lost in thought. He initially thought that he didn't want to feel indebted to a comrade, as on that day, Lokak and Azarian had not abandoned him when he was unconscious and instead risked carrying his burden. But on reflection, just as the girl's inner voice had said, he owed Lokak nothing, as he had already saved his life. So why did he still not want to abandon Lokak? Was it because he was essentially a good person? Leon didn't deny the goodness in his character, but that was just the sense of morality an ordinary person should have, not so good as to be altruistic and disregard his own life safety. What then was the reason for still being willing to take the risk? After much contemplation, his confusion gradually cleared. Let's put it this way. Fleeing north was my idea, but I don't feel responsible for Azarian falling into peril now, because he had also thought it through before agreeing to it. We are co-conspirators in our current situation. Leon spoke with relief. However, Lokak is different. He was just following and trusting my decision. I do feel responsible for his current predicament. You've said that a soul devoured by a demon is a more miserable fate than not resting in peace after death. Then I have even more responsibility to rectify my mistake. Otherwise, if someone's soul is doomed because of my decision, I won't be able to sleep well for the rest of my life, even if I survive. He stood up and patted Azarian, who had been praying with closed eyes and resting. I'm going to rescue Lokak. The risk is great, and I might die. Azarian opened his eyes, puzzled. He couldn't hear the inner dialogue in Leon's heart and was quite confused. However, once he understood what the other person meant, Azarian's brows furrowed slightly. From the beginning of our escape, has there been any situation we've faced that wasn't high risk? He grasped Leon's outstretched hand, swaying to his feet with his legs weak and sore. I can't get out of this place alone. Besides, in the relatively spacious clearing within the woods, guided by the voice of the girl in his mind, and after repeated corrections, Leon had finally completed etching the interlocking demon runes and runes on the cleared and leveled dirt. He did as instructed, embedding small fragments of various rock ores into the grooves of the array's demon runes, strictly adhering to the required amounts and spacing, and then filling each rune indentation evenly with ground greenstone powder. The structure of the array had 2 layers. The inner layer was the nested double array ritual core, and the outer layer's circular patterns marked the boundary of the containment ritual. According to the girl's voice, to increase capture efficiency, the array should ideally cover as large an area and have as many nested structures as possible. However, due to the severely limited substitute materials currently available and a lack of a true mage to preside over the ceremony on site, this 10-meter diameter circle was already the maximum extent that could maintain the array. Treading lightly through the gaps between the runes and demon runes, Leon moved to the center of the array core and first made sure not to leave footprints that could destroy the integrity of the array. He had previously asked the girl's voice whether such exposed etching on the dirt could be easily damaged. The answer was affirmative. A qualified mage would have more robust and solid means of inscribing arrays, but of course, Leon currently could not achieve such professionalism and had to make do. However, she reassured Leon not to worry too much. Once the ceremony began, she would channel chaotic energy through the entire array, and by then, the solidified structure of the array would not fear trampling. Although it could still be easily broken by other spellcasters using magic power, they were currently facing threats neither from mindless ghosts nor from the not particularly intelligent angry demon, which possessed and controlled a mere mortal, Lokak, who would have no knowledge of how to disrupt magic power and destroy the array. Standing in the center of the array, Leon called out to his companion, waiting outside the array. Azarian, marveling at the mysterious and complex patterns on the ground, carefully stepped over the lines upon hearing Leon's instruction and walked over to Leon's side, handing him the small wooden cage he was holding. Leon took the so-called earth-veined spirit lamp, a name full of fantasy, but similarly limited by the materials at hand. This device he had crafted under the girl's guidance by hand was quite unprepossessing in appearance. The making process involved using a certain special or found at the foot of the mountain as the core, wrapped in mud clay, and then carving a bunch of small runes on the wet clay shell, culminating in placing it into a wooden cage fashioned from specific types of tree branches. This simple spirit lamp was hardly more complex than the mud play of children in the fields. Of course, before being infused with magic power, it had no function. It was just a pile of rocks, mud, and tree branches equivalent to trash. To transform it into a pathfinder that could guide them out of the cursed land, it still needed the soul of an intelligent being as its wick. Setting the earth-veined spirit lamp into the dirt pit at the array's core, Leon tore another piece of cloth from his battered hemp trousers and covered it to ensure that the dirt wouldn't seep in and ruin the runes inside the spirit lamp. And then he filled in the pit. Rising up, he borrowed a long dagger from Azarian. Spreading his left palm, he placed the long dagger across it. As it came to the crucial moment, he couldn't help feeling a bit uneasy as he confirmed with the girl's voice again. Though asking now might be a bit embarrassing, couldn't I just poke a hole on my finger? Must I cut open my palm? Leon didn't know what others thought, but at least for him, slicing his own flesh felt more queasy than being stabbed by someone else. Stop talking nonsense. If you knew how to use magic power, you wouldn't even need to shed blood for this step. Don't worry, I'll help you stop the bleeding, the girl's voice chuckled. Seeing Leon holding the dagger with a pained expression and hesitating, Azarian suggested, "Do you need fresh blood? If so, just cut my hand." Leon awkwardly smiled at him, declining his partner's kind offer. "No need. It has to be my blood." Initiating the ceremony required not only etching the array and chanting spells, but also the most basic drive of magic power. Leon, of course, couldn't use magic power, so he had to build a bridge connecting his body and the array with fresh blood for the mysterious entity within him, who would then take over and sustain the array with what was known as chaotic energy. It was just shedding some blood, and as a grown man, he wasn't afraid of small wounds. If he wasn't scared of death, why fear a little pain? Biting his teeth, Leon steeled his mind and swiftly slashed with the dagger. First, his palm felt cool, then it warmed, and the signals of pain rapidly traveled to his brain. Pain, pain, pain. Grimacing, Leon clenched his left hand, tossing the dagger back to Azarian. He let the blood from his continuously bleeding left hand drip toward the center of the array, staining the underlying core demon rune red. Taking a deep breath to endure the pain, he loudly chanted the invocation for the summoning ceremony. In ancient Lorelette language, in the name of Inya, abide by the decrees of the Dead Sea of the eternal, frozen origins. Unlike during previous practice sessions, where he merely recited, the moment Leon spoke the first line of the spell aloud, he felt as if something within him began to flow, slowly moving from his wounded left hand toward the ground below. That peculiar flowing sensation was similar to when he had cast Isa's arrow that day, but it did not drain his strength to the point of fainting as it had last time. Ancient Lorelet language. All spirits of shadow heed my command. You who traverse the sleepless dust, swiftly return here. As Leon chanted, within the 10-meter diameter circular array, pieces of rock or embedded in the ground burst forth with faint glimmers of light in a mysterious order, and every array node crackled crisply, as though the sound of crystals shattering was ceaseless. Azarian watched the miraculous scene before him with a mix of astonishment and curiosity, feeling as though he were amidst the mysterious unknown recorded in books. Although he knew of the existence of spellcasters, he had never witnessed the release of magic until he met Leon. Ancient Lorelet language. With my body and spirit as the guide, I call upon the wandering souls. I shall grant you release from disharmony's bonds. I shall grant your souls a resting place of peaceful sleep. At the center where Leon stood, the buried earth-veined spirit lamp suddenly flared up, a crimson light of blood spreading along the demon runes etched on the ground, converging until with his chance, the entire array's pattern filled up, shrouding the whole array in bloody light. Gusts of sinister wind, arising from nowhere, violently swayed the surrounding treetops, and standing beside Leon, Azarian increasingly felt the chill surrounding them intensifying, causing him to shudder as though he were in an ice house. After slowly reciting the spell, the red glow emanating from the demonic runes on the ground gradually dimmed, and Leon let out a long sigh, his body relaxing. He could no longer hear the girl's voice. According to her, she was now using the remaining power to maintain the ritual, and whatever came next, Leon would have to face alone. Is it done? Azarian, nervously clutching a long dagger, asked. Yes, hopefully it'll draw the demon possessing Locax soon. Leon nodded in response. He didn't know where his possessed friend was currently wandering, and now he and Azarian had no choice but to wait like sitting ducks. Bending down, Leon picked up a crudely made wooden spear from the ground, somewhat nostalgic for the pitchfork he had discarded earlier. Thus they quietly crouched within the array as time blurred little by little. Suddenly, they heard sounds, and both, already highly alert, turned towards the direction of the rustling bushes. Leon stood up, spear in hand, ready for combat, his left hand wrapped in cloth, feeling less pain amidst the crisis of survival. Azarian gripped his dagger and slightly distanced himself from Leon, ready to coordinate an attack on the enemy together. Finally, the slow-moving figure pushing through the underbrush revealed itself, and the tense youths could finally discern its form. Unfortunately, it was not Locax's figure. It was a massive and strong canine, but its body was dry and blackened. Leon did not mistake it for a wolf because its wide and short ferocious teeth resembled those of a Rottweiler from Earth's past, though it was much larger, at least twice the size. Its fur had long since fallen off, and its skull was hollowed out deeply, its skin stretched taut over an enormous skeletal frame and grotesquely muscled body still visible beneath. In the eye sockets of the giant dog, where its flesh eyes had once been, now glowed a sinister dark red light. Just one look at this undead hunting hound made Leon involuntarily tense up his entire body, as even with the dog's body dried up and withered, it still looked far more fierce than any ordinary wolf. A Dawana war dog. Leon, these dogs are extremely fierce. They could bite through iron armor. I mean, they definitely could have while alive. Azarian broke out in a cold sweat, recognizing this distinctive and valuable war beast. This was a prized war beast from the western part of the Orland Kingdom, a symbol of the Ramon family of Dawana, valuable enough to rival a war horse, ferocious to the extent that not even 2 or 3 soldiers could subdue it together. If it knocked you down, its maw full of fangs could easily tear a person into ragdoll shreds. Leon's gaze never left the large deceased dog. His only weapon a makeshift wooden spear, hardly adequate, naturally not wanting to clash with such a formidable war beast head-on. The girl's voice had said that undead beings like living corpses might lose their intellect from life, but would retain their strength in this spirit-like field where natural decay was absent. He immediately decided, slowly back away, lead it to the trap. Just as Leon finished speaking, the ghastly undead war dog opened its cavernous mouth, its soul seemingly retaining its hunting instincts from life, intending to roar and intimidate its foes. However, from its withered throat, only a disturbing, dry rasping sound like a broken bellows emerged. Leon, not grouping together with Azarian, each back towards separate pits they had prepared in the array. The war dog, now a living corpse, showed no signs of probing its prey. It abruptly leaned forward, charging at unbelievable speed towards Leon, the nearest target. The undead corpse dog had long lost the instinct of a living creature to be wary of injuries. The relentless spirit, deprived of rest for so long, desperately craved the breath of life. With jaws full of sharp teeth, it aimed straight for Leon, vowing to swallow up the fresh flesh and blood. The ghostly fire in the living corpse's eye sockets trailed two terrifying streaks of blood-red color as it charged. In the blink of an eye, Leon gripped the shaft tightly, thrusting the wooden spear head-on into the mouth of the charging beast. The maddened hound, with no intent to dodge, predictably crashed straight into the spear's point. Just as the sensation of the spear piercing flesh returned through the spearhead, before Leon could rejoice in his success, the unstoppable force from ahead pushed him back several steps. The rough shaft, dragged by that force, chafed against Leon's palm, drawing out several bloody scratches. With a crisp snap, the wooden spear's shaft broke in response, and the living corpse dog's massive jaws snapped closed, crushing the foreign object in its mouth like a pair of giant pincers. Its solid and sharp teeth, like a wood chipper, easily ground the wooden spear head in its mouth into scraps. Leon, startled, kept increasing the distance between them. He stared at the fierce hound that chewed wood as if gnawing sugarcane, watching the splinters it spat out, his emotions fluctuating wildly like a roller coaster. Indeed, the brain of the once dead, undead corpse dog was no longer effective, and its straightforward attacks were easy for him to predict. However, death had also brought it incomparable advantages. If a living creature were stabbed in the throat with a wooden spear, even the fiercest of jackals, tigers, and leopards would be gravely wounded or killed. But to the already deceased undead, such lethal injuries from before death hardly inflicted any damage. The young girl's voice had said that due to the spirit-like field's characteristics, the undead here were even harder to deal with than in the outside world. Even if they were cut at the waist or beheaded, it was difficult to destroy their mobility. One must destroy the physical structure or the brain of a living corpse to stop it from being a vessel for the undead spirit. Only then could their physical form be defeated. Leon, holding a broken piece of wood, approached the location of the trap behind him with a grave expression, daring not to turn and run away. A regular person's speed couldn't possibly escape the pursuit of the beast. Exposing his back would only lead to a swifter death. What to do? Should he simply recite the incantation and activate the spirit-repelling rune to extract the soul of the corpse dog? No, that was not an option. They had already spent too much time and effort setting up the array. To waste the ritual hastily and have to gather materials anew would introduce too many uncertainties. Without anything that could be considered a weapon, he was now unable to continue fighting the fierce living corpse dog. Just when Leon was out of options, he saw Azarian quietly approaching behind the living corpse dog. The dull-witted living corpse, with no capacity to anticipate a sneak attack, set its blood-red, undead eyes menacingly on Leon, with no intention of a confrontation. It immediately barked ferociously and lunged to bite. The terrifying fangs reached him in the blink of an eye. Leon, helpless, could only use the wooden shaft in his hands as a baseball bat. Stepping back defensively, and with hands clasped around the stick, he struck forcefully at the hound's head. Shouting the dog-beating stick technique in his mind, Leon swung his club with precision, hitting the hound's head squarely. His forceful strike successfully knocked the ferocious beast's skull to one side. Raising his hand to repeat the trick, however, before the second strike could land, the war dog lunged and bit down hard on the middle of the wooden staff, its sharp teeth easily snapping through the fragile wood like a cookie stick, leaving Leon with a short stick no longer than 2 palms. As the stick broke, the war dog's momentum did not wane. Its massive and powerful body charged through with fierce force, knocking Leon to the ground, its terrifying maw snapping towards Leon's neck with a foul wind. At this life or death moment, the will to live overshadowed the fear of possibly losing an arm, and with his right hand, he quickly jammed the remaining piece of the broken staff into the gaping, bloody maw before him. The upright stick barely managed to prop itself against the war dog's snapping jaws. With his life hanging by a thread, Leon finally saw Azarian's figure leaping onto the back of the war dog. The noble youth mounted the living corpse war dog's loin, both hands gripping the inverted dagger blade as he thrust with all his might into the hound's head below him. The dagger pierced the war dog's dry skin, but the tip failed to penetrate its hard skull. The rebound almost knocked the weapon out of Azarian's grip. It merely scraped off the contour of the war dog's skull before sliding ineffectively aside. The long dagger's tip was severely dulled by the excessive force. Cursing the poor quality of his weapon in frustration, Azarian didn't give up after the unsuccessful strike. He lifted his right hand, following through with the remaining force, this time driving the dagger hard towards the war dog's eye socket. However, the violent shaking and struggle beneath him caused his lethal stab to miss the mark. The dagger's chipped tip only pierced into the war dog's neck. If it had been a living creature, severing the artery and windpipe would have been a deadly blow, but they were facing an undead living corpse. The war dog opened its mouth to spit out the short stick that was clogging its bite, then crazily shook its body, easily tossing Azarian off its back. Not waiting for it to bite again, in a split second, Leon, with quick reflexes, reached out his left hand and grabbed the dagger in the dog's neck, pulling it out forcefully. Poochie, with the blade in hand, he changed the angle. The long dagger, smeared with black blood, was thrust from below upward into the dog's head. Leon pushed the dagger tightly against the gap in the war dog's lower jaw, merely inches away from its brain. The undead hound shook its body even more furiously, while Leon desperately gripped the handle. This hard-won opportunity would be utterly wasted if he let go now. Roaring, he shoved the war dog's body with his right arm, his knees propping him up to flip over with all his strength. Leon tried to push the struggling beast into the pit trap beside him. A sudden force came from the right. It turned out that Azarian had charged back and slammed fiercely into the side of the war dog. Finally, this slight imbalance caused the fierce beast to topple toward Leon's left side. The mindless living corpse naturally lacked the capacity to ponder the enemy's strategy, and its heavy body collapsed the thin layer of disguised earth as expected, falling into the pit trap. Leon, who was flipped over, didn't let go. Clutching the handle of the dagger, he was dragged down into the not-so-deep pitfall. The stubby wooden cones at the bottom of the pit easily penetrated the body of the warhound as it fell under its own weight, while Leon's body suddenly felt a jolt, and his left hand, using the force of the fall, pushed the dagger blade all the way into the warhound's brain. Gradually, the living corpse ceased its movements, finally becoming a true corpse. "Leon, are you all right?" Azarian was leaning over the edge, looking down into the pit. I'm fine. Thanks to this dead dog cushioning my fall, I'm uninjured," Leon replied with relief, looking up. Turning his head to look at the warhound's blood-red, eerie eyes, which had already extinguished its glow, he stirred the dagger once again uneasily, and then pulled it out before stabbing it back in through the corpse's eye socket, repeating the action several times until he confirmed that the brain had been mashed, and only then did he stop. Standing up and stepping on the dog corpse, Leon grasped his companion's hand, which was extended from the mouth of the hole, and climbed out of the trap with difficulty. But as soon as he and Azarian had a moment's rest to catch their breath, they were immediately startled by a noise ahead. Somehow, a tall and majestic humanoid shadow had emerged from the shadows of the woods with an eerie stride. The resounding clash of metal armor pieces and footsteps sounded as though each step was trampling over Leon and Azarian's hearts. With each pacing step, the extravagant long sword swung back and forth in his hand, flashing an eye-dazzling cold light. What came into view was a knight armor neatly worn. The thick and solid plate armor components were intricately and exquisitely crafted, with a thorny rose emblem carved on the shoulder shield to symbolize the family, and the helmet of the armor had long since vanished, revealing the bald human skull beneath. The shriveled skin stretched tightly over the skull was wrinkled, and the icy cold and sinister blood-red fires in the dark eye sockets declared his identity. A human knight turned into a living corpse, even though they had already encountered the dangerous and ferocious undead corpse dog. This undead creature, transformed from one of their own kind, exuded a bone-chilling coldness that was even more alarming than the previous warhound, a sense of inexplicable danger rising in Leon's heart. The corpse demon knight, who resembled a corpse ghost, seemed to have sniffed out the scent of living beings and began to hasten his steps. Leon wanted to curse. They couldn't catch a break. Could it be that the dead dog they had just encountered belonged to this guy? He and Azarian did not dare to delay and scrambled to their feet, fleeing helter-skelter. But as they ran in the opposite direction, trouble arose again. Another familiar roaring sound that seemed to herald death came from another part of the dense forest. Kill them all. Exterminate all of Canadar. Everyone who blocks me from saving my sister must die. Kill. The voice, filled with hate, tainted by the angry demon, grew closer and closer. Leon stopped in his tracks. His heart was filled with complaints. A blood-soaked Lokak was making a mad dash toward this clearing. The strong young man with a ferocious face clutched a bloody sword in one hand, while the other hand held the decapitated head of a living corpse. His chain armor, which had been through who knows what fierce battles, was full of large and small gashes and pierced holes in the armor chains and iron pieces. Leon came to a halt, realizing that, at the very least, they wouldn't have to dodge the pursuit of the corpse demon knight while awaiting Lokak's approach. They changed direction and ran towards the edge of the array. The rest is up to me. While they're distracted by the array, you need to quickly hide in the woods on the outskirts. Leon instructed Azarian to disperse, then stationed himself on the edge of the array. Turning around, he nervously watched as Lokak neared the range of the array. Even the corpse demon knight entered the boundary from the opposite end. Good, I'll finish all of you off in one fell swoop. Leon raised both hands, orienting his palms toward the core of the array, and began chanting. Ancient Lorelet language. The true word is here. By the command of my name, call upon the netherworld gate to open. Call upon the decree of the dragon. Ancient Lorelet language. Spirits that cannot rest. Shadows beyond this world's shore. Facing the furious charge of the corpse demon knight and Lokak from both his left and right, Leon chanted the spell rapidly in his panic, his usually calm voice becoming increasingly frantic. The array was still too small, with its mere 10-meter diameter being crossed in seconds, and the first to charge was the towering undead knight. Leon didn't dodge. Right in front of him was another trap he had prepared earlier. The corpse demon knight's heavy footsteps landed on the thin, camouflaged netting, and it immediately fell through with a clatter of armor, ending up with only its upper torso poking out of the not-so-deep pit. Watching the towering undead knight fall into the pit, Leon didn't even have time to feel relieved. Just as the heavy armor-clad body sank, he saw a black shadow whistling through the air behind it, rapidly enlarging in his field of view, incoming like a shot. What? Unable to react in time to dodge, he managed to twist his head away in desperation, but the flying object still struck his shoulder with fearsome momentum, causing him to cry out in pain and fall backward, off balance. As he hit the ground, his right shoulder felt as if it had been hit by a lead ball. The pain was excruciating, forcing beads of cold sweat to break out on his forehead. It was then that Leon recognized the rolling object beside him. What struck him was the severed head of a living corpse that Lokak had carried earlier. That wasn't the important bit. The critical thing was that the spell he was near finishing had been interrupted. Realizing the dire situation, Leon executed an expert roll to the side, flipping twice before using the momentum to stand up and look up. Lokak, with his sword drawn, was already bearing down on him, close at hand. In his panic, he could do nothing but retreat repeatedly. Fortunately, Lokak, who was bringing down his sword with a fierce motion, was suddenly tripped by something at his feet and fell to the ground, caught off guard. Not wanting to waste the opportunity, Leon, who had narrowly escaped death once again, bolted past the fallen Lokak, sprinting rapidly toward the other side of the array. He had to quickly start the chant for the spirit-repelling rune again, or all was lost. When Leon ran back into the array, a glance told him that his escape had been thanks to the corpse demon knight reaching out desperately and grabbing Lokak's ankle. The undead, caught in the pit, grasping the boy's ankle for leverage, pushed against the edge of the hole with one hand, kicking the earth wall with his feet, pulling the boy outside so forcefully that he had to stagger backward. The heavily armored corpse demon knight then leapt up fiercely with both armor and body. Jumping out of the pit, the corpse ghost landed with a clang and stood firm. In the next moment, it swung its sword at Lokak, who was on the ground before it. To the frenzied, wandering soul, even a demon host was still a living creature of flesh and blood at the moment. Clang! The sound of clashing gold rang out loudly as the two swords intersected. The corpse demon knight's heavy and powerful blow was not only parried by the angry, demon-infested Lokak with a backhanded defense, but the superhuman Lokak, in his rage, had even managed to press the corpse ghost's blade off course, exposing its core. Lokak, acting on instinct, twisted his sword play and thrust it fiercely at the corpse ghost's chest. Clang! The blade struck the knight's chest armor, shattering the tip of the burdened sword, but still managed to push the undead knight off balance, causing the corpse ghost to stagger back several steps before catching its equilibrium. The terrifying force not only left a dent in the solid armor like it had been struck by a nail hammer, but Lokak's own right wrist was also twisted into a horrifying shape by the rebound. Lokak's eyes turned a crimson red with rage. The twisted right hand, clutching the sword handle, snapped back into place with the sound of crackling bones, empowered by desecration. He rose from the ground, his hulking stance like that of a demon. Hiss! Blood-mixed saliva dripped from Lokak's mouth, now filled with non-human fangs, as he let out a hoarse roar from his increasingly distorted throat. Die! Die, all of you! Charging forth, the boy swung his jagged and blood-stained sword, stirring up a stench of blood as he pounced toward the object of his hatred. In his blood-red eyes gone astray, there were no more corpse ghosts or undead in front of him, only the detestable faces of Canadar thugs. Knowing nothing of fear, the undead positioned its stance obediently following its instinctive sword skill engraved into its bodily reactions, sidewards positioning the lavish treasure, sword in its hands. Holding the sword with both hands in front of its withered and fierce face, the corpse demon knight pointed his sword tip towards the boy attacking him. This unawares, Lokak stepped into the knight's fighting range, and immediately his broken sword fell towards the corpse ghost, vowing to split in half the murderous kin that he saw. The corpse demon knight took a quick step back and forward, swiftly shifting from the right to the left like lightning, changing direction to dodge the attack, and pushing forward with his sword for a counterattack. Zing! Sparks flew in all directions, accompanied by a teeth-gritting sound of metal against metal. Lokak barely managed to withdraw his blade in time to block the corpse demon knight's simultaneous, but this moment of clashing was far from over. Had the corpse demon knight still been alive, he might have already elegantly and neatly followed up with his coiling sword technique, sealing the throat of the poorly skilled opponent before him in one move. However, the living corpse, left with nothing but its bodily instincts, could only follow one basic swordsmanship move after another in its rigid form. When its sword path was obstructed, it raised Locax, yet to be power blade with a cross sword guard, invading the opponent's close range. With a strong turn of the body accompanying the steps, the corpse ghost blade swung from the left to downward, slashing towards the young boy's neck. It was only that half-beat's waste of an instant that allowed Locac to narrowly shift his position and press back his arm sword, bending his knee to raise the blade horizontally. Swords clashed with a shrieking friction, fastening together in a deadly grip. Locac had barely parried the blow that almost beheaded him, yet the disadvantage in stature and position under the repressive body left his sword crushed, unable to maintain the parry. Seizing the opportunity as his opponent clearly hadn't stabilized his stance, the corpse demon knight, clad in heavy armor, suddenly lifted his sword and knee in a brutally fierce knee strike that made Locac grunt and his body stagger. But the knee strike was just a prelude. The corpse demon knight's true heavy chop followed immediately. A thunderous boom. Locac was forcibly brought to his knees by a tremendous force, smashing the ground and fracturing it terrifyingly, the youth's legs buckling beneath the strain, snapping audibly. With the full weight of the knight's burly frame behind it, the falling long sword effortlessly breached the clumsy defense with a single strike. The long sword drove Locac's own blade into his shoulder. Had it not been for the non-human strength he possessed after being possessed by a demon, that fearsome chop would have split the young man diagonally in two. But the one bearing this strike was ultimately not a pure human. Roar! Locac's twisted face was nearly unrecognizable with rage, and as he continued enduring the humiliating oppression, the demon's roar finally burst through the mental veil, descending upon this world from the depths of the youth's fury. Releasing the hilt, Locac, knees broken and kneeling on the ground, fell into a rage. His hands, turning into claws, seized the knight's shin-armored legs, pulling with inhuman strength. Caught off guard, the knight crashed to the ground with a clangor. Locac, like a wild beast, pounced, heedlessly pulling the armed sword from his shoulder. The corpse demon knight's right hand tried to retract the sword for a counterstrike, but now engaged in a scuffle on the ground. The long blade hindered him. Before the left hand could grasp the blade to defend with a half-sword technique, Locac swiftly chopped with the armed sword in his hand. With great strength, the sword easily cut through the armor joint along the knight's right arm. The ferocious youth howled as he dragged the blade, viciously tearing off the corpse ghost's right forearm. The armor's connecting components snapped, and the severed arm, along with the illustrious knightly treasure sword, flew into the distance. But it was his excessive force that left Locac vulnerable. As he leaned to the left with the swing, the corpse ghost beneath him threw a swift left hook, heavily flipping the youth's body over. No matter how great the strength of the youth infected by the angry demon was, there was still a considerable difference in body weight between him and the heavy-armored corpse ghost. The also extraordinary knight pummeled Locac to the ground with a solid punch. Taking advantage of the blink-of-an-eye moment before the youth could rise, the corpse demon knight flipped over, skillfully pinning Locac beneath him from behind. The knee pressed heavily on the youth's back, while the heavy right steel boot stamped on the sword-wielding right wrist. The corpse ghost's remaining left hand clasped Locac's throat from behind. Just one squeeze of the iron gloves, a light twist, and it would all be over. As if sensing the joy of engulfing a living soul, the undead knight's eyes glinted with frenzied ghost fire. A sudden chilled gleam flashed by. Wielding the knightly treasure sword that could slice through iron like mud, Azarian swung down from behind a corpse ghost. The knight's head flew off the neck like a ball and rolled on the ground. The sudden turn of events left the living corpse motionless. It was not dead, but the sudden loss of vision and its connection to the body plunged the undead into bewildered disarray. Its left hand reflexively reached to touch its now empty neck, trying to pick up its fallen head. In this brief pause, Locac beneath it broke free from the restraints. Azarian, having successfully ambushed the enemy, smartly chose to turn tail and run. After all, his companion, who was clearly under demonic control, was hardly going to thank him for the rescue. Lokak heaved off the headless living corpse from on top of him, and, fueled with rage, the demonized youth spared no thought for why the corpse demon knight had suddenly lost his head and thrashed with his sword. The sightless, undead knight, now bereft of the ability to dodge, was cut down by the furious youth. With sword strike after sword strike after sword strike, the corpse ghost body was dismembered into pieces along the cracks of its armor. Severed limbs, bleeding black, oozed like sentient worms, eerily crawling around in search of its head. A brief but intense battle reached its most perilous juncture as Leon, anxious, fortunately completed the final syllable of the activating spell amidst the clash of those two fierce beasts. Light burst skyward from the array. Runes within the demon rune trajectory ascended like projections into the air, encircling as if forming a three-dimensional barrier. The youth, nearly half-demonized, dropped the torn living corpse in his hand. It, with baleful, bloodshot eyes, turned, and only then did the angry demon from beyond the soul realize the anomaly beneath its feet. Sadly, it was two blood-red eyes, sharply pointed fangs, gradually beast-like claws for fingers and toes, and the horns that were slowly growing under the skin of his forehead. No matter how one looked at it, Lokak before them had long departed from any human resemblance. The angry demon attached to the young boy let out a piercing roar, its hollow, distorted bass shaking the surrounding air incessantly. But no matter how angry the demon realized the situation was, the mysterious rune magic had already been successfully activated within the array under its feet. The spirit-repelling runes floating in the air neatly circled around the magic light's circular trajectory, rapidly rotating, and magic power suddenly whipped up gales around it. The demon-possessed Lokak, bound by an invisible force, could only struggle and roar in vain at the spot, no longer able to step towards Leon. Outside the array, Azarian hid within the forest stirred by the gale, his eyes wide open witnessing the incredibly shocking magical spectacle. A streak of red, like a flame, was being slowly drawn out of Lokak's body. As the visibly distorted illusion gradually took shape, a blank-faced, semi-transparent young phantom was also dragged out from within the red demon's illusion. At the same time, wisps of murky shadows were also being pulled out from the dismembered limbs of the corpse demon knights by rune magic. The spirit-repelling runes were taking effect. Leon brought his thumbs and index fingers together in each hand to form a triangle, a Dharmaseal gesture taught by that young girl's voice, and he aimed it at the exposed demon projection. Loudly chanting the demon exorcism spell, Leon's speech in ancient Lorelette language became faster and smoother. The red flame-like demon projection let out a soul-shattering, silent scream. However, it was powerless to reverse the powerful and ancient demon exorcism ritual. Within the nested array, the pure magic light gradually evaporated its projection. Azarian, with a grim expression, raised both hands to desperately block his ears from the demon's shrieking, but he still couldn't stop the piercing soul roar, instantly feeling dizzy. In a daze, he thought he saw a fleeting illusion flash by Leon within the array. Hair as pure as snow fluttering in the wind, a white robe fluttered about her petite frame by the wind of magic. Azarian blinked confusedly, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. It was still Leon's figure in front of him. Leon watched as the demon projection was expelled by the array. He continued the last step of the ritual, driving the soul into the container they had buried earlier. The outer perimeter magic light quickly converged with the operation of the magic array, but before it fully gathered into one point, an unseen force propelled Lokak's soul back to its original body. The animated corpse knight, however, was different. His frenzied, wandering soul was forced to converge into the center of the array by the magic direction, quickly solidifying into a dazzling orb of light that then fiercely plunged into the ground, sucked into the crude earth-veined spirit lamp. The gale gradually subsided, and the brilliance of the magic also dimmed anew. Leon sat down on the ground, finally heaving a sigh of relief. "Well done," the young girl's voice gently praised inside Leon's mind. "You didn't mess up the spell even once. It seems you do have some talent." Leon gave a wry smile. Perhaps the crisis of life and death had triggered his survival instincts, allowing him to recite those spells so smoothly, something he hadn't anticipated. Leon got up and walked over to where Lokak lay nearby. The muscular youth was lying on the ground, the demonic features on his body gone. His hands and feet had at least regained human form. Leon squatted down and pried open Lokak's lips. The teeth were normal. Then he rubbed open the other's eyelids. The eyes had returned to their normal color, except for some remaining bloodshot in the whites. "Does this count as a success? Could there be any side effects?" Leon asked the young girl's voice apprehensively. "Side effects? Maybe none, or maybe there are. Like maybe having frequent nightmares in the future. Hey, don't be ungrateful. Compared to having his soul devoured by a demon, any price he might pay is nothing." That makes sense. Leon realized that they were fortunate just to have survived. Calling Azarian back to watch over his companion, Leon quickly moved to the center of the array and uncovered the pit where the earth-veined spirit lamp was buried. A white light immediately shone through. Even through the torn fabric blocking the soil, the spirit lamp's light still seemed particularly bright. Leon carefully picked it up as if holding an incredibly rare treasure. This was their key to possibly leaving this spirit-like field and returning to reality. "Did it work? Is this the guide instrument you mentioned?" Leon asked inwardly. "How should I use this thing to find the way?" He removed the hemp cloth from the wooden cage. Without the barrier, the light was so bright that it dazzled him. "Looks like you're in luck. The brighter this light glows, as the soul used as the wick moves closer to the place it desires to return to for rest, the light will brighten. Right now, the brightness indicates the reality that the wandering soul desires to return to is very near," the young girl's voice answered. "So, I just need to hold this thing and see which direction is brightest, then head in that direction, right?" It's that simple," the girl's voice confidently stated. Leon felt a great relief in his heart. He picked up the spirit lamp and shone it around. Indeed, towards different directions, the brightness of the spirit lamp changed dramatically. "Leon, Lokak has woken up," Azarian called out. Hearing the call, Leon quickly returned to his companion's side and saw Lokak lying on the ground with a dazed and bewildered expression. "How is it? Are you awake?" Leon crouched down and shook his hand in front of Lokak's eyes. "What? How come I'm lying on the ground? Did I faint?" Lokak, holding his head, sat up groggily. "You really slept deeply. We almost got chopped up by you along the way," Azarian said with a bitter smile. After a brief explanation, Lokak finally understood what had happened before, but he truly had no memory of the process and only vaguely felt as if he had. Seeing Lokak's apologetic face, Leon did not dwell on this issue further. After all, they had not yet escaped from danger. Having just awoken from a deep sleep, Lokak stood up and noticed the horrific bloodstains on his body and his torn and tattered chain armor, realizing how severe the terrifying change his companions spoke of had been. With the crisis temporarily over, Leon called his companions to gather the scattered pieces of the animated corpse knight lying around. He wanted to loot the body for equipment. The armor on the dead knight obviously belonged to a noble, high-quality gear. Despite taking many powerful strikes from the demon-possessed Lokak, it only showed a few dents. Was it not a loss not to take it? However, reality was cruel. After struggling a bit, they had to give up on the idea of taking the armor. First, their physical strength was simply insufficient to carry along the heavy knight armor. Second, the tailor-made armor did not fit any of them. Although the young men were well-nourished and almost the size of average adults, this knight was still far too burly and strong. Fortunately, even if they couldn't take the armor, taking the gorgeous knight's sword that Azarian had found was not a problem. Leon removed the sword sheath tied to the knight's armor and took the long sword from Azarian, examining it carefully. It was a very pretty weapon, close in design to a hand half-sword, With an unknown gem inlaid at the end of the hilt, the cross sword guard adorned with elaborate relief patterns, and the blade engraved with what seemed like a family motto. This was not just for show. Its previous battle had already proven its superior quality. In a tough clash with the demon host, the blade still showed no nicks or chipped edges. As a former aficionado of cold weapons, Leon was indeed amazed by the extraordinary material strength. He couldn't help but wonder if this was the so-called enchanted weapon from the online novels of his previous world. It might not be scientific, but it certainly felt magical. It should be dwarf steel. I don't know if it's crafted by dwarf artisans, but the material of this blade could be dwarf steel, said Azarian, who, as a descendant of nobles, seemed to have discerned a few things. Leon could only express his admiration. As long as it was useful, that was what mattered. Compared to the mercenary sword that had been hacked to uselessness, this noble knight's sword, if placed in a game, would certainly have a blue quality rating at least. His life or death struggle had not been in vain. This time, Leon unhesitatingly sheathed the knight's longsword, hanging both it and the belt around his waist. His lack of humility about the equipment was not due to greed, but having experienced the incident of the demon possession among his companions, Leon had come to understand that in this mysterious and unpredictable realm, with the mysterious Miss Mage in his mind aiding him, he was the one among the three at the lowest risk of being possessed by evil spirits. It was safer for him to keep this sharp weapon, rather than risk a frenzied companion using it to attack his own people. Regarding Leon's decision, Lokak, needless to say, and Azarian fully agreed. He had already witnessed the formidable capabilities of this wild mage companion multiple times and naturally had no objections. While Leon and Azarian were discussing the sword, Lokak found a roll of parchment only about the size of 2 palms from a leather pouch on the knight's belt. Unfolding it, the group discovered it was a map. Unfortunately, the parchment only had symbolic terrain sketches and a triangular marker, with no text or discernible landmarks. A treasure map? Leon couldn't help but recall the classic scenes from literary works of his previous life. Operating under the principle that it wouldn't hurt to keep it, he stuffed it into his pocket. Before leaving, the three pushed the knight's body and armor back into the pitfall they had encountered earlier, quickly covering it with soil, which served as a simple burial. Although this animated corpse knight had posed a significant threat to them just moments before, after all, there were no grudges before death. Moreover, Leon was still holding onto the knight's spirit, ready to use it to guide their escape, so a proper burial seemed appropriate. After burying the body, Leon, holding the earth-veined spirit lamp in one hand and clasping the long sword in the other, led the way at the front of the group. Azarian held a long dagger, while Lokak carried the nearly broken sword right behind him. Following the direction where the spirit lamp's light shone the brightest, the three once again entered the dense forest.